Welcome to the Jack Hopkins Show podcast, where stories about the power of focus and resilience are revealed by the people who live those stories. And now, the host of the Jack Hopkins Show podcast, Jack Hopkins.
So, Rebekah Jones, I am so glad to have you back on. And I must say, I think part of that is that we are so much alike.
I'm not going to disagree with you. I actually, I said yesterday to my husband, I was like, you know what? I feel like he's the male version of me if I stuck with this for a few more years.
Right.
Because we always seem to be like on the same page.
Yeah. And, we both know what it's like to make really tight friends with some people and then have other people who run away as fast as they can because they don't want to be friends.
Yeah. And risk-averse people is quite common in the Democratic Party.
Yeah. That's been, I think I talked about that a little bit yesterday with Anthony Scaramucci. I said, as a former Republican coming to this party, that's been my biggest complaint is what do you have to do to get the party as a whole, and particularly leadership, to fight, yeah. to roll up their sleeves and duke it out.
Well, there's more sinister theories about that. Is that, of course, that they don't really want to begin with. They're satisfied with the status quo. They just need to, this is going to sound very awful, be more successful in herding sheep to vote for them so they can maintain that status quo.
Yes.
But, I know a lot of people in Democratic politics, and might be a lot of them, but it's not all of them. Yeah. And there are enough people in prominent positions who aren't like that to still leave me being a member of the party.
Sure. I understand what you mean. Here a while back, and I guess I shouldn't even really bring it up because I can't remember what event it was, but I think you may know. There was some type of in honor of somebody type event where Chuck Schumer was in attendance and Donald Trump was speaking. And it's been within, I don't know, the last 3 or 4 months.
I think it was the Catholic fundraiser.
Yeah, I think it was too. And to be fair, there were people from both parties there.
Prominent people.
Yeah. And what stood out to me, though, Chuck Schumer was seated to Trump's left, kind of somewhere on the front. And when Donald was really digging in, kind of making some jokes about some issues that are pretty sensitive to the Democratic Party,
Schumer, laughing.
Yeah, he was laughing. Now, I brought that up at the time, and some of his defenders, rushed out and said, he was just. But anytime I hear that word just, my ears perk up. Yes, right.
It's entirely possible he was like, to get through this night, I'm going to need some hard liquor. And by that point, like, who cares?
Right. Yeah, it's one of those things.
I was at a very private event with Chuck. After Harris had become the nominee, and there was a lot of debate about the vice presidential nominee. First of all, that the person that brought me to this thing is a very important person. And they could have, because they all know who I was and recognized me immediately. They could have said, I don't think this is an appropriate conversation to have around somebody like that. And I would have not been offended. I'd be like, yes, I'm somewhat famous. Actually, pretty much exclusively famous for not keeping my mouth shut. So that would be fair. But they decided to have this conversation in front of me anyways. And there was a lot of drinking. First of all, that was one of the first things I learned in politics is everybody is drunk all the time. I may have walked away with that one. But good old clap to your own coat.
It's Friday night.
It is. And I've had a really long day. But They were talking about Tim Walz as the VP pick. And this was like a week before it was announced, maybe 5 days. Oh my God. Do you know how hard it was? I didn't burst until the night before. I posted a Harris Walz like t-shirt thing, that one of the graphic designers who was, involved with making sure that they had the stuff ready to go for sale, because obviously they wanted that to hit the shelf the minute they announced it. So
You bet.
those people had to know. And luckily, I only did it on like Threads, so nobody really noticed, or maybe they thought I was being hopeful. I thought I was going to be on the shit list after that, like for real, on the shit list. And then I got invited to something else this week, and I was like, I know what? I was like, I didn't think Chuck Schumer cares about social media or reads it, because I'm pretty hard ass on it.
Yeah,
I think he read some of the things I said. I wouldn't be invited to these things, but it's all transactional with these people. It's really unfortunate, but the higher up you go, it's all about what's a resource we can keep close enough to our circle so they feel included, but not so close that they could screw something up just in case we need them. And I felt like that's how, like, myself and a lot of other people I think that are progressive influencers on my level feel sometimes.
Yeah.
It's just very disingenuous. And that's what I felt when I watched the laughing during the Catholic thing. I was like, this is all just a game for you guys. But this is like our real life.
Right. I have to agree. I was pissed off. I was like, look, you know what? Out here, these are black and white issues for us. Even the ones that have gray area, because of the voting system, the way that works, we think in terms of black and white, in terms of pick a side, right?
Yeah.
And so when we see people operating in the gray area that we sometimes see pretending like they are black and white or opposite one another, it's not confusing to you and I guess, in the sense that we know what's going on. Yes. Yeah.
They're sitting there telling us that this election is the end of the world for America. And that, we, us, the people, have to fight like hell. We've got to give up all our money to these people and put everything we have into it, while they're just drinking and having fun with each other. I mean, and that feels very much like you're not really acting like this is the end of the world,
right?
Right now, but you're expecting all of us to treat it this way, and that's not being conveyed. It's there's something lost in translation, and I think it's just that a lot of normal people don't think this is a game.
Yeah,
and they don't understand that that's how those types of people exist.
I agree with you in that an elected leader on that level, look, if you are going to tell me, if you're going to give me some version of it's the end of the world, then it better be the end of the world when you are telling me that. Don't later let me see you in a frame of reference or context where you're going, it's not that big a deal. Be consistent.
Like Biden immediately inviting Trump and being all warm and cozy. Everyone's like, you told us this guy was going to destroy the United States and he was going to round people up into camps and that he was the most evil, awful person in the world. And then you're like, let's just come by and have some drinks and shake hands. It's all fun and games, It'll be cool.
Yeah.
That to me was like, nobody's going to trust this ever again. Like we made...
No. And don't get me wrong. And I think the same is true of you, although I'll let you speak to that. Look, I love Joe Biden. I love Joe Biden. But as you said, if you are going to tell us the things that you did before the election, which we agreed with, by the way, it's not that we were like shocked and surprised or even needed you to tell us, but when you come to us in that manner, as though, okay, I get you, I understand you, the citizens, your fears and concerns, but then because of tradition and protocol, a day after the election, you're like, hey, buddy, come on over. Let's
Yeah. Like, I remember that was like the tweet is, we talked about the future of our country and they're both smiling. And it's like you had people ready to like go to jail if that's what it took to stop this guy. And then it's just all cool once it's done. And it was, the Democrats wanted to make a point that this is how a transition is supposed to work. Not like the last time, to kind of reestablish what the precedent is. And I get the historical importance of that. Like years from now, that will be very important. But right now, I hate to use this word because it's one of the worst words that I think you can accuse a person being of. Disloyalty. That's just how it feels like, to everything that we stood for, not like our party, which is having a multiple identity crisis across the board, but to the belief that democracy was sacred and that it had to be protected. I mean, shit, I didn't go to prison just for fascism I didn't go to prison, I'm sorry. I didn't go to jail and face going to prison just for fascism to take over the whole fucking country. And I mean, half the people who appointed are from Florida. And, it's like, I'm sitting there like, oh God, who that wants me dead or in jail is going to be appointed to a cabinet position today?
Right.
And, DeSantis really, really wants to have his name in there. And it's kind of sad and desperate if you know the backstory behind that. But it's just like, what? Shit, guys. I think got raided and went to jail for this shit. I was ready to go to prison. I didn't flee like Ed Snowden or Julian Assange. God bless his soul. I stayed here to fight because it was important. And I was willing to do that. And yet, nobody here is willing to, because they have shit. They have plenty if they wanted to, they could do.
Right.
But they just don't want to. The cowards.
Right. There's a book actually that's referenced quite a bit. I don't own the book. I always forget. I always say I'm going to buy it. But I think the title of the book is 3 Felonies a Day. And it essentially was written by an attorney, I believe, who was saying, look, if somebody wants you bad enough, the average American commits 3 felonies. I don't know if it's 3 felonies a day, 3 felonies a week, whatever. But frequently. And entering into the time frame that we are about to find ourselves in, that is a little spooky, Well,
I don't know if we commit that many because Florida really, really, really wanted to get me. And I walked out scot-free. No convictions, no guilty pleas. I managed to get my ass out of there. But I had a lot of institutional support, academic support, professional organization support, a lot of public support that most people in that situation don't have. And that definitely played a part. But there was a higher government by the time all of that started to happen because Trump was president when I was raided. But by the time that I was arrested, it was 3 days before Biden was inaugurated. And actually, on my drive home was Inauguration Day. And it was I actually think I posted about this because it was so strange is that when I left, we moved there January 6th to DC, or 5th, which was, I thought this place was like a war zone because of that. We were 4 miles from the White House. It was crazy. I left to go to jail in Florida. I was sick with COVID, so I went to jail for one night. They let me go. I was in hiding under a fake name in a hotel, sick, passed out on the floor, thought I was going to die. But on my drive back home to my new home in DC, Biden was being sworn in. And I realized that something is changing. And there was someone that I could go to if this really became out of hand.
Right.
And I think that's part of the reason why they never made my case a federal case. Or
I was
brought
going
in
to
the
ask you.
FBI or anybody like that, because as long as the state controlled it, Biden couldn't pardon me for a state crime. The very first thing that he signed as president, the very first thing, was the COVID-19 Whistleblower Protection Act. Yeah. Jamie Rathke flat out told me he wrote that for me, and I was like, oh, that's great. It wouldn't help me, but now that I just got back from jail, but thank God. But, I had hope that, if there were other people like me in states like Florida, there was somewhere they could go. Yeah. And I think that comfort has been just, it kind of evaporated overnight. And Florida has become America. And that's frankly the scariest thing of all, is that all the things that were tested and tried in Florida, this classic fascist playbook, are now being implemented everywhere. I mean, Project 2025 is like the DeSantis Federalist playbook. And we're going to have to live under that for at least 4 years. Hopefully only 4.
Right. Hopefully only 4.
Yeah.
I'm sure, no doubt, that at the time of at the raid or the arrest or even serving time in jail, the thought has had to have crossed your mind, this could have been so different if Trump would have been reelected. In terms of how it applied to you, do you think you would have been, maybe they would have looked at your original charges differently?
Yeah, I think they would have. Because I knew some people in the Biden admin from my work that I'd done in 2020. Like I knew the guy who was appointed to head the White House COVID data task force, Andy Slavitt, and other people that I had enough connection with. I was being like, this is what Biden ran off of, was doing right by COVID and the first bill he signed. And then yet, because that all happened right before he was sworn in, and right after the election, that was the thing people were talking about. It would have been really bad optics to ignore the situation I was in. But yeah, if it was Trump, I don't know. Well, I mostly stayed off that guy's radar for good reason.
Right.
I'm on the shit list of these very powerful men. It just keeps happening. But yeah, I wouldn't have felt like there was a potential, savior out there for me somewhere. It would have been very scary.
And that's a big deal. That is a big deal to feel like somebody's got your back, somebody on a level that whether they did or not, at least could kind of come in and say, you know what, this is injustice. We're going to do something here. Just knowing that
that was
right.
We moved to this area specifically because our first house here was in, sprinting distance to like 6 different consulates that do not have extradition. So
right.
We're like, okay, like Zimbabwe's right there. And we have all these other ones over here. And if we really, really had to, if DeSantis sent stormtroopers up from Florida, which he threatened to do when I moved here, they threatened to come to my house again and take me. I hit the road and was like, well, guess what? I'm on my way to jail, so you can't do that. And there's no purpose in doing that. We could literally pick up a bag and just run somewhere safe.
Yeah.
And I'd certainly know that Biden wouldn't have tried to extradite me for any of those things.
Sure.
Trump hates DeSantis, so I'm not sure that he would have. But you never know. This is all about favors. It's all about tricking.
That's the first thing that came to mind. I don't know. I saw a blurb the other day that potentially Trump was considering DeSantis for something, and my first thought is that'll never happen because he would be taking too much of the spotlight away from Donald, or if it does happen, it'll be so short-lived just because of the conflict between the two of them. I would guess that's kind of mirrors your thoughts on it.
DeSantis thinks that he is divine government and that he's entitled and appointed by God to, go to these high places. And Trump doesn't believe in God at all. So there's a fundamental difference to the two right off the bat.
Sure.
And he thinks DeSantis is a joke. And he hit DeSantis really hard during the primary. And I got to know some of Trump's people. I think I might have actually spilled the beans about that on your show last time.
I think you did, maybe. Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, for anybody watching, Rebekah and I did a prior episode of the Jack Hopkins show. So if you haven't seen it, be sure to go watch that.
Yeah. And so, I had some friends who told me, like, how could you do that? Like, how could you work with those people? How could you help those people? I was like, I'm not helping them. I'm hurting him.
Right.
And, if Florida had risen up and like gotten the pitchforks and DDD'd this guy way back when, I wouldn't have to be fighting this monster, what I feel like, on my own. I wouldn't be shouting, into an echo chamber of people who already know all of this and won't change anybody's mind. I got Donald Trump to use my words against DeSantis, and it was brilliant. And yeah, I had somebody recently I got into a big fight with over Israel-Gaza stuff, and he threw that in my face. And I was like, wow, that's pretty fucked up. I was like, you better than anybody understand why I did that. You were the first person I told that I did that.
Yeah.
And because I disagree with you about a genocide, you're going to try to make me feel like a bad guy as if I'm aligned with Trump. So this is strange bedfellows. But, I think and that kind of encompasses what I hate about Democrats is they're cowards. We won't go into spaces that we don't feel safe. Like
Yeah.
Grant Stern, I don't know if you know him.
Yes, I had him on here a while back. Yeah.
Okay, I love him to death. He
Yeah.
is one of the most insightful people I've ever met in my life. His
He
daughter's
is.
adorable. You know, I met his family and everything, and he goes on like OAN and Newsmax all the freaking time.
He does.
Like,
He really
yes, he
does.
does.
Yes.
He goes straight to them and challenges their perspectives, and he's kind of becoming like their token liberal.
Mhm.
But it's like otherwise we wouldn't have a voice there. Like
Right.
if I hadn't gone to Trump's people, what I had to say would never have reached half the population.
True.
And we have to
Very
be
true.
willing to do those things. We have to
Yeah.
be willing also to invest in people like you and not cede this space to the Republican far-right QAnon crazy people, which has been since the election one of like the biggest things people have been pushing. It's like you have a slate of talent so deep that you could invest $100 million in it and you get at least like 100 different top shows out of it. Like yours was, it was one of the ones I mentioned. And I was like, it's insane that we're not doing that because we're afraid. We're afraid that
Right.
somebody like Jack Hopkins will say something that doesn't align with the party platform.
Right.
And that there will be bad names called about Democrats who support you. And we for some reason think that, oh my God, I must stop this. I must stop funding this. I must not associate with this. You know, I have to, we can't have loose cannons.
Right.
He doesn't care about that. I mean, half the stuff Joe Rogan says is liberal or doesn't make sense. And then sometimes he's conservative. It's all over the place. But they
Yes.
know that at the end of the day, he's on their team.
Right.
And that's the agenda that he will forward. And the details don't matter as much. So we don't do that.
No, we don't. And I think one of the things we miss out on, and I think Anthony and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, when we aren't having those conversations, we lose out on a whole bunch of feedback that lets us know more than any amount of campaigning door to door could ever give us,
Yeah.
right? Because it's in those moments of disagreement where the emotional stuff comes out, where the stuff that really matters, the stuff that's people are really going to be voting on,
Yeah.
that's when that comes out. And man, if you're willing to throw in the towel on that and say, nope, can't talk to you because we might disagree on something, you're throwing a lot away, I think.
Yeah. It was Wednesday because this is how bad time has gone for me. The other thing that I was invited to that I said I was surprised to invite to was like 2 days ago. It feels like forever. We went over some of it was like a high-end debrief for political operatives in this area in Montgomery County, which is one of the most politically active places in the country because half of DC lives here.
Right.
Like Jamie Raskin's my rep, and we just elected Angela Alsobrooks. That was a hard-fought, win with a good person. And I was just at first I was like, I can't believe you guys are still inviting me to shit. But they were showing some of the trends that we had seen, and it pretty much since like 2002 or 3, the majority, almost 3/4 of the people in this country, no matter who is president, think that our country is moving in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And we have seen the seesaw of power exchange by one or more branches every single election since 2004. Every single one. And it's because people are just frustrated. And when they're frustrated, they take it out on whoever is in power, regardless of whether or not what they say makes sense. So like, look, I know something's not working. Let's try something else.
Yes.
And that is something that's, like I said, it's like the last 20 years, it's a phenomena. Coincided with the rise of social media, with the Iraq war, taking this really kind of public downward turn. And a lot of other things. I mean, Hurricane Katrina was about that time. And so it's just if people are unhappy, they're going to blame whoever is in power.
Oh, I agree.
And that's not very productive for making change.
No. And I'm going to give you, I'm no,
and
No.
so it's how do we tease this out to do something effective?
right. I just had this thought the other day, and I'm no James Carville or any kind of strategist. It's just a random thought I was having. But I thought, particularly in this election, and of course, hindsight's 20/20, but because of the simplicity of this thing that you just nailed, which is when people are frustrated, they just take it out on whoever. It's almost as if we would have put up a candidate who was so much unlike what Democrats would normally vote for, but because of who it was against, they would have voted for him anyway, that some Republicans would have said, you know what? I can actually buy into this. I wouldn't have voted for him, or I wouldn't have voted for her because they were just towing the party line. But this is radically different. And I think we are so afraid to break that mold and say, you know what? We are going to try something different. It's what people want.
I mean, Kamala Harris was something different. You know, when she was Senate, she was one of the most progressive. Her voting record was one of the most progressive senators during the term that she was in Senate. A lot of people felt like she felt pressured from the Biden administration to go along with policies that she may not have otherwise agreed with, because she had to, on one hand, remain loyal as the vice president, on the other, try to make herself different. And she wasn't given enough time for that. The guy who was presenting all this data the other night said the second that Biden decided to run for re-election, we were toast. The second that he said, I'm running for re-election, it was over. We were never going to win. And if he had done what everybody kind of thought he was going to do when we elected him the first time, it'd be a one-term, let's fix some shit, stabilize, get the pulse going back normally, and then we'll explore new avenues, then it would have been completely different. Because something we didn't see Democrats talk about was that Trump was already president once. We should have been talking about what he did when he was president. The last time he had this chance, he tanked the economy during COVID. He almost started a war with, Iran and all of these other things. Instead, we talked so much about what he might do that we didn't associate him with a bad period of time that everybody remembers.
That he already did do.
Yes, it's like he had his chance to fix shit and he wrecked it. And, Biden has stabilized things. It's not great, but here is a new Democrat with fresh ideas, and they're going to pick up the mantle and bring us in a new, different direction. And I think for Harris, that was her struggle. She did not have enough of an identity separate from Biden and not long enough to establish it. She was just doing.
And you took the words right out of my mouth where I was going with that, because you are so right. She was different. And as you alluded to, I think the mistake was not unleashing her, right? She felt this commitment, this loyalty to President Biden, not to harm him. Yeah, absolutely. Get it. I get it. But I think it probably played a role in costing her the election. I read an article the other day, and I can't remember. It might have been David Frum. I can't remember who wrote it, but it was a great article. And it talked about the moment that everything shifted. And this, of course, is debatable, but it was a key moment when she was on The View and asked, can she think of anything she would do different from President Biden? And she said, right now, there's nothing I can think of. Yeah. And I agree.
And because everybody's frustrated with their life, they hear that, and it's like, so you're not going to try anything different.
Right.
This guy's saying he's going to come in with all these new ideas, so it's the what do I have to lose mentality. Yeah. Things are shit right now for me and my family. She's saying she's not going to change anything. At least that guy's saying, I'm going to, blow it up and rebuild it. And a lot of people like that idea. Even on the left, a lot of people like the idea of the system is broken, blow it up, and let's do something different. Right. I mean, of course, they've been completely bamboozled, and the people that want to blow it up are the same people in charge right now, and they just want to rebuild it to be more beneficial to them. But, and then that's where the media part comes in, and God knows that I've said enough. How great and fantastic traditional media outlets have been in covering this kind of repeatedly unprecedented period in American history. But you can't tell people that they should be grateful for what they have when so many people are struggling. It's like, that is not the answer. Someone's like, look, I'm working 2 jobs. We got back to, I think they said pre-COVID, pretty much that's what our economy is. It's like, Does no one remember how shitty that was? How everybody in the country, I think it was like 90% of the country, was one, unexpected hospital bill or one expected, car repair bill away from poverty. That was not a good place for most of America. Bragging that you got us back to 2019 is not a good thing. It's not enough.
Mm-mm.
You don't go out and tell people, look, it's a lot better than it was. It's still not enough. What are you going to do differently? And then Harris said, can't think of anything. And it's like, oh.
If there's one thing, and I hate to, I guess I don't hate to do it because I do it. I dislike that I can do this, and that is give Donald Trump credit for anything. But if there's one thing he excels at, and there's a quote long before Donald Trump that had to do with, I think it was the Sizzler Steakhouse. I think it might have been something somebody said about them and said, we sell the sizzle, we don't sell the steak, right? So meaning the commercial, the steak is on the grill, and it's the anticipation of that steak. That's what they sell. And Donald Trump frames things in such a way that he creates such an anticipation and excitement, and half of it's bullshit, at least. And
the other half
sometimes
would kill everybody.
right.
He doesn't know what a tariff is, so it's like, oh, we're gonna do tariffs. People are like, yeah, it's like, do you need tariffs? Like, come on.
Right.
Yeah.
We need to be able to frame things in a more emotional way. Talking policy just doesn't resonate with
people.
With
don't vote
guy.
for policy anymore.
No.
They
don't.
That age probably died with the 24-hour news cycle. Or
Yes.
some people say it died with Kennedy versus, Nixon, the debate stage, that was the moment that policy discussion died.
Right.
I don't like to give into that because I think that the fact that the more educated you are, the more likely to be liberal is a strength, not a weakness. Because
it is.
It also works the reverse way. It's bimodal. It's not a linear line. And
Right.
so like you have the
agree.
poorest people in the country and the least educated people in the country, and then you have the middle class, you have a Republican, and then you have the smartest. It's bimodal.
It
and
is.
There's a reason why the poorest people in the country vote the same way as the most educated people in the country, and that is because they understand the system.
Yes.
And why it's not working.
Agreed.
So I don't think that we should give up on policy. I just think we need better salesmen. And that sounds really, really shitty.
No, we do. We need,
we need people who can make people understand, who actually care. That's always a benefit.
Right.
They legitimately care about people. I think you can always kind of tell when somebody's not really there. Like nobody thinks Mitch McConnell gives a shit about anybody. He's all about the party and the power. Nobody's going to mistake him for an empath.
Right.
But we have a lot of Democratic people who fake it. And for me, it's easy to read through them and their actions and the things that they vote for. But, real people who live real lives, not online, not in CEO meetings or investor meetings, like on the job, they can tell, they feel that. And Trump, for as ridiculous as he is exactly what he is in real life on TV. Like, there's this like whole thug persona thing. No, that is him all the time. He is being authentic, authentically stupid, authentically racist.
Sure.
But still, that is his real self. Right. And we haven't found our JFK, the embodiment of somebody who knows what they're talking about, has the policy points, has the, I hate to say it, good looks and charm, and can sell something to people who are looking for hope. I mean, we had Obama. I guess I should say that. Obama was all of that.
He was. And
absolutely. We're trying to recreate it, but maybe it can't be recreated. Maybe what we need next is the next step from that.
Right.
And I feel like that's part of our struggle too. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that Jared Moskowitz is one of those people who's fake as fuck, but
I think you mentioned that in episode 1 as well.
He's now on the Doge committee too. So he's on the UFO committee and the Doge committee with all Republicans.
I see that.
He was totally supporting for the AG nominee. And I tried to tell people about this guy. He was like, I got sucked in too. He was my friend. He was a close friend, like talk to every single day friend. And then something changed.
Well, as I recall on the first episode, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you were saying that he and Matt Gaetz were at one time pretty close friends.
They have always been close since they were both in the state legislature. And he is one of the people named in that report that, well, apparently they voted not to release. Today. I think that vote was today or yesterday. And so that's it. It's gone unless one of the Democratic House members who received it decides to leak it, but they won't because of the same things that we're talking about. They're cowards. There are Democrats who are implicated in it, which makes things messy for everybody. There are large financiers who donate, smart people donate to everybody. Because so no matter who wins, they got it in the track. That's like United Healthcare. They are almost 50-50 in the percent of people that they support, so that no matter who comes out on top, they're above them.
Right.
And that's why they won't release it. I mean, if Democrats really wanted to put up a fight, they'd leak it, and they won't.
Right.
Maybe somebody will have a change of heart and do it, but
looking back, I think the record shows that pre-politics, Donald Trump always contributed to candidates of both parties.
Well, he was in New York City, and most of the power in New York City is Democrats, so that's who he gave to.
Right.
He had, come up through Miami, and there was a lot of Republicans. He would have given to them. It's just about greasing the wheels of whoever's around.
That's it. That's what I was going to say. He knows I may need you sometime in the future. You may not align with me right now with what I need, but you might. And so whether it was an actual campaign contribution or something else that you could call a favor, and like you said, not to pick on any one particular person, I think it's just a way of doing business at that level because, it is what it is.
Yeah. There was a national beer pack. I think it was actually called Beer Pack, that I approached about endorsing me instead of Matt Gaetz. Because I guess Democrats are cagey about that stuff. And I was like, fuck no. I was like, let's have a couple beers. Let's talk about policies you want to instill. And it was like a craft brewery national pack. And I was like, you guys make the good stuff anyways. So, let's talk about how we can, I was like, I'm drinking you anyway. I mean, if I have to and there's no other choice, maybe a Heineken, but I'm not drinking Bud. And they basically said, yeah, we will give to you, but we'll also give to him. And I was like, hey. And they said, what? He's probably going to win. We like you, but he's probably going to win. And I found that very, very telling. I was like, so you're just business people. For most of them, they're just business people. They're like, yeah, we like her. I got a lot of attention, which is great for them. That's really ultimately what matters. But they're like, he's going to win, so we'll give to him. But sure, because you're spunky and you're fighty, we'll give you a little bit too. So it's just business. That's why I said the transactionalness of politics is just business. And maybe they're second guessing that. I don't know, with this DDD shooter out there, but the news the last 2 days has been insufferable.
Right.
Everything on is a different news agency being like, police are looking for information. Police found this backpack. Police are nobody's going to fucking give this guy up. I seriously hope that they realize that. Unless somebody feels like they're personally in danger, this guy has been anointed to almost hero status and nobody even knows who he is.
He has. I agree. And it took me...
Stop trying to push us to be against this guy. We're not against this guy.
Right.
Nobody's going to come out and be like, yeah, we should start killing all the CEOs. Maybe
no.
People are. I mean...
Sure. I'm sure there's that population.
Morality and such a thing. I mean, but this isn't just your standard, small business CEO. We're talking about the largest, healthcare agency in the world. The healthcare agency that denied 32% of all claims made. 32%. Only 2 out of 3 people got their claims approved through United Healthcare. And that's absolutely insane. And they land these huge state contracts. I heard that people at United were starting conspiracy theories that the NYPD wasn't actually looking for this guy because United Healthcare is the NYPD healthcare insurance provider, and they denied 50% of their claims over the last 5 years.
I
was like, judging from the internet, they seem to think we should all be out sleuthing for this guy like he was the Boston Marathon bomber, which, by the way, the internet sleuthing identified the wrong person and that person ended up dead. So that's not necessarily a good thing that you want to do.
Right.
But, it's like, we're not going to help you with this. Like,
Right.
this guy is in the middle of a DOJ investigation for defrauding $101.2 million from United Healthcare because they found out, there's two different lawsuits, they found out they were being investigated for fraud and a whole bunch of other stuff. And so they started dumping stocks, knowing that the second that information became public, the stocks would tank. And that's exactly what happened. This guy personally got away with at least $15.1 million. These are bad guys. And the investors were so cold about it. Holy shit. They literally stepped over his body before he was even dead and were like, we're still holding this meeting and, we got to move forward. And
right.
For his job, less than 48 hours later. And that was the only moment I actually kind of felt sympathetic towards this person was they're like, he's dead. Let's get somebody else and move on. And I was like, oh, damn, even if you're the CEO of this, they don't think you matter, that you're a human.
Right.
And
I had some lag time on that story. I was paying attention to a couple of other things, and it kind of, I just, in the periphery, I knew it had happened, but I hadn't really zoned in on it yet. But a few hours later when I did, and okay, this is what's about, this is who it was. And I remember thinking in my mind, this guy's going to be a friggin' hero in about 24 hours. And that, like you said, it's almost where it's at.
Yeah, well, I think the latest update was that they know that he bought a bus ticket out of New York. And honestly, you should read the comments on all of this. And people are claiming it's toxic. I was like, no, toxic is threatening to cut off a woman's head and rape or sever her head because she stood up for Ron DeSantis. That's fucking toxic. Saying that, why is it okay that this guy helped deny claims that kills, I think it's United Healthcare, 68,000 people a year, every year die because of claim denials and delays.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But somebody, probably the relative of one of these people, or somebody radicalized, because clearly what was written on those bullets was meant to send a message.
Clearly.
Yeah. So either he's radicalized against the industry, which nobody can blame him for, or he's been personally affected. I told my husband, I was like, if it turns out this guy lost a parent or a spouse or, God forbid, a child,
oh, yeah,
no jury in the world is going to convict this guy.
No.
And I was like, nobody's going to help them find him because they're acting like what he did is the most atrocious thing comprehensible. Several blocks away, 2 teenagers were attacked because they didn't speak English by 3 men with screwdrivers. One of them died. One was a 17-year-old immigrant and died. The other one's in the hospital. Just blocks away. No FBI involvement. These 3 men are still at large, and their faces aren't being plastered by literally every network news station every 5 minutes on all social media. That is why I think there's this disconnect between the media people, which has been a problem for a while, and
it has.
They're like, I want you to catch the motherfuckers who stabbed and killed a 17-year-old with a screwdriver because he didn't speak English. That is who I want you to catch. The guy who took the bus out of the country, and clearly this was it for him. He decided he was going to do this one thing. He's not on a spree and get the fuck out and some kind of revenge, possibly killing. I don't give a shit about that. Another CEO, they've already replaced him. Who the fuck cares? That kid, though, that kid did not deserve to die. Why aren't you looking for those people?
With this CEO health story, I personally have had over the last probably 35, 40 years, a couple of friends who it could be argued and probably proven in court that they died as a result of the claims being denied.
Yeah.
And I think back to the grief and the pain and the sheer anger at first, where they would have absolutely, if there would have been a figurehead, somebody who they knew, a face, they would have fucking killed him in an instant over the death of their daughter. No question about it.
Oh, yeah,
so as you said,
you denied inhalers when they're going through chemo, and their families have been charged $30,000. They lose everything. I was young, but when the movie John Q came out, and the guy makes the ER hospital hostage, not really, and he doesn't intend to hurt anybody. He just wants them to save his son, but his insurance company has denied his heart transplant because it's an elective surgery. No one walks away out of that movie thinking that John Q was the bad guy.
Right.
Not a single person. You know who they think's the bad guy? That bitch who denied the insurance claim. Who the only reason that it ends in this like great resolution is because she hears him talking to his son and then suddenly finds a heart and soul. But that is the part that's most unrealistic. You know, like that is the part to me that was the fiction. But we've been almost conditioned to not think that that's the bad guy. I mean, because if it was my child sick with leukemia, you know, and we lost everything and we did everything to save this child's life and it still wasn't enough. Yeah. I think that more people sympathize with a parent in that position than could ever sympathize with a CEO who designs an AI algorithm that ends up denying 90% of claims for elderly people, which is what they did. And that's that's human nature. It's just, I mean, we wouldn't be in this problem if Congress didn't have this like fucked up healthcare system and never, you know, put the public option in, which was really about Barack Obama trying to placate Republicans under the false pretense that they would work with him in the future, which, by the way, never fucking works. You can extend your arm, like that's what Harris did, as far out to the Republicans as you think, you know, and you think they're going to grab back, but no, they're going to cut your fucking arm off. And it happens every damn time. Every time we try to compromise, they're like, oh, sure, we'll do this, this, and that. And then we lose what we set out to do. And they get away with all of it. I mean,
I don't know who it was. Somebody the other day, in the article that I was reading, it was a Democrat, and they were talking about moving forward. They want to be able to reach across the aisle and work with them. And I'm like, motherfucker, do you not understand what they have been saying they want to do to the Constitution, to the people in this country? They've issued every kind of threat that you could issue.
Yep.
And you want to reach across the aisle. If reaching across the aisle was what was going to work, we wouldn't have gotten to this point in the first place.
Exactly. Like Obama bent over backwards. He had 2 years where he had complete control. And then you had the Tea Party wave, which was really just this kind of reflexive racism that was funded by the Heritage Foundation to make it look like it was grassroots when it never really was, to make a real difference. And he decided if he gets one thing done, it's going to be healthcare. That was the one thing he said he would do because it was one of the biggest issues of, and this was what, 16 years ago? So that's what he did. And it was at the very last hour. It was Joe Manchin, a couple of other fuckers who were like, if you want to get the majority for this, you have to do certain things. And the one thing they demanded was seeing the public option. I remember my brother-in-law, before he was my brother-in-law, told me that because he had checked it on his phone, and I cried. I was sitting at dinner and I cried. I cursed him out too, but he wasn't my brother-in-law then, so it was fine. But I had just had my son. This was 2009. And I did not qualify for Medicaid because I was over 18, so I couldn't get on my parents' health insurance back then, which for all of the youngins out there, if you were over 18 years old and you were pregnant and you had a dependent, you could not be on your parents' health insurance. Now it's 25 instead of 18. And I didn't qualify for Medicaid because the state calculated my scholarship to Syracuse as income. Syracuse was $50,000 back then. And so it looked like I was doing just fine. And I remember thinking, I mean, I was already in debt, so there was not going to be any fixing that. But how many other people were going to go through this? And I just started crying. I was at the Whistle Stop Cafe, which was a trailer next to the train tracks in Wiggins, Mississippi, crying because they gave up on the public option. And to me, that set the precedent of you cannot work with these people. And of all the data that we saw the other night, I thought there were 2 points that really stuck with me. The first was the loss of enthusiasm within Democratic Party when she hosted the Cheney and other type people events, and the respective lack of pull that had for Republicans. It ended up driving more Democrats away than it did bring in moderate Republicans, which was to me very telling because I wasn't sure at first. I was like, that might have offset. But
right, I wasn't either.
And so
Right.
seeing that data for the first time was like, so that really was a loss. I was like, I was hoping that would at least be neutral,
Yeah.
And the only other thing that could have turned the tide was Gaza. But, we're fucked on that issue anyways, so no matter what. And it's just, to me, it's like, we're either the moral party who stands firmly for what is right, or we're not. The pretending to be both at the same time, obviously people see through that.
Yeah.
This wasn't like the biggest turnout election. It was, I think, like the second biggest turnout since maybe the 80s. But second to, of course, 2020, when voting was accessible and easy for every person in the country. But, they were only about 1.5 points apart. And the only places where she could have swung it, Wisconsin, Michigan. The issue that broke people was Gaza. And so to me, I was like, so bringing in Cheney didn't help, or it didn't help in the places where we needed help. And really, that's all we're talking about. We're talking about like 7 or 8 states. If you cannot push the needle in those states, it doesn't matter how many people you have from New York.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't matter how many people show from California. Like Hillary Clinton did, she won the popular vote by almost 3 times as much as Donald Trump did this time. And she was still not president. So it really only matters in those 7 states. And in those 7 states, the only issue that could have broken those 7 states was 3 of them, which may not have been enough to win, and it was Gaza. And everybody was trying to say that. Oh my God. I was part of that group. Even though I implored everyone, I was like, you can't fucking vote for Donald Trump. You have to vote for Harris. Because Harris, at least there's a chance she'll listen to us. Like, Donald Trump's going to let Jared Kushner turn all of Gaza into a Mediterranean resort, literally paved with the bones of dead children. And, at least with Harris, the Democrats are scared and they're cowards. So if you build enough of a pressure campaign, you can sway them. And Harris was never all AIPAC in before Biden anyways.
No.
In fact, there were several points in the last year and several months where she said things that she was reprimanded for because they were not in line with the Biden administration. She said ceasefire in December of 2023, and she was publicly railed for it by Biden's people. So, it was like she's playing this part. She's got these loyalties. Biden's ancient. I mean, he was born before Israel was even existed, so this is it's a generational thing. And the worst part of that to me is the Democrats were blaming the people who care about Gaza. I'm like, I don't fucking care about Gaza. Like, I've taken a lot of fucking heat for caring about Gaza because, frankly, what's this white bitch, know about the suffering in the Middle East? I don't. But that doesn't mean that I can't care about it. I can't look at it from a scientific standpoint. I've been published now in estimating the death toll in Gaza because I've worked in natural disasters and man-made disasters, and I know how calculating those uncertainties work. And from a scientific and from a moral standpoint, I cannot side with Israel. At the same time, I have never once suggested anybody do anything other than passionately and, excitedly vote for Harris. But I got to be honest, we are hurting ourselves every time we say stupid shit like, well, I hope all the Gaza supporters feel better now. It's like, how is this different?
Yeah.
The trajectory that we were on with Biden was the destruction of Gaza. It was with the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. How has anything changed? It might happen faster, but there's no guarantee they would have stopped. And acting like, no, you're suffering now. Fuck you for not doing the thing. It's like, why is it on us? Why is that on us, the voters, and not the candidates for listening to us?
I think the thing we forget after an election.
A lot of rum in this drink. This is like 3/4.
Good.
Yeah.
So it's going to get better as we go along. I think the thing people forget so quickly right after an election is they forget how quickly the next election is going to come around. They forget how quickly those 4 years go. And if we start tearing each other completely apart right after the election, instead of working to build, saying, okay, what do we do? What went wrong? How do we put this back together and go? And I've got to tell you that something I've noticed that I think it on a very micro level, it's kind of a metaphor for me about the larger problem in the Democratic Party in terms of what we spoke about earlier. Unless you just line up with everything, then you're kind of cast out to the side.
I said earlier, it's like I actually started to draft something that was a list of 100, what we would call like creators or talent that could spearhead a motion. And this was something that was distributed internally within the party. And you were on the top 10 of my list. And it was immediately flagged as unreliable.
Right.
And to that, I thought, y'all are asking me for this fucking list. If there's anybody in the world who has shown they will not fit in a fucking mold, it is me.
You bet.
It's like, they like me because I can raise money. Honestly, I think at the end of the day, that is it. I mean, I raised $1 million for my campaign, banned on Twitter, starting fresh with Facebook, Instagram, had never used them before. Didn't use TikTok until like 2022. But despite like my huge platform on Twitter, everybody thought that's how I would earn money, but it wasn't. It was off of my reputation.
Right.
And that's $1 million for a congressional campaign that had no fucking chance of winning, for a person who's never run for office ever before, with no social media, presence whatsoever. It was impressive to them. They were like, oh yeah, we should. And I helped some of them. Only the people that I'm morally aligned with. But if you're going to ask me who I think we need on board, and then you're going to flag them for being not fully in line, then you're asking the wrong fucking person.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I see, to me, being completely in line is a weakness.
It's exhausting. It's like I get so sick. There are some people who are prominent in the social media sphere who I see them just towing the party line every day. And I'm like, oh my God, do you have an original thought? Do you have a single original thought? Do you have any contribution other than the same thing that's being shared by everybody else to bring to the discussion? Because at this point, you're paid mouthpieces, and that's it.
That's
and if
the thing.
we're going to succeed, we need something deeper than that.
You bet.
And you need people who can speak with these issues, not just with authority or not, expertise per se, but heart. Somebody who can say, look, I'm not being told to tell you this. I care about this. I'm allowed to focus on this thing because this is something that means something to me. And it matters. Not just, I'm going to, the talking points of the day, because I get the talking points memo of what to share every day. Most of the time I just fucking ignore it. But occasionally I'll be like, all right, it's a Harris thing. I'll tweet it out. But it's ridiculous to think that making us all generic is failure. It's setting us up for failure. We need actual people. And people are risky. I mean, but we're not risky, though. That's the other thing, too. So we're not risky in the way that they are risky. No. I mean, some of these like Tim Pool, who's talked about me multiple times on the show, spread a lot of shit about me, stalked me for a while on Twitter, was literally being paid by Russia, like $100,000 a week to like spread one pro-Russian story. And, I kind of want to feel like I am owed all this shit that he was paid to talk shit about me. All the money you're talking about me. But they did actual things that borderline illegal. But the Democratic Party's afraid of investing in someone who would disagree with them about something. And that to me is like, you're risk adverse to disagreement. They're not even risk adverse to foreign funding for election interference. Like, how do you think we're going to win this? This is insane. And part of what the Democratic Party espouses is the power of uniqueness, of individualism, of experience, of heart. Like, that's supposed to be us. Yet we have nobody out there championing that. And that to me is a missed opportunity, to say the least.
Yeah.
I'm paying the $100 million to invest in people like you. So at the end of the day, it's not
that emotional loaded punch is what has been lacking for a long time. And I think there's this quickness to jump to conclusions that anybody who's being very emotional must be saying something that's irrational, right? Right. Which sometimes that's the case. People do. But when you ignore what your prefrontal cortex is processing as logic just because it's got emotion attached to it, and you're looking for somebody that only packages it the way you do, so now it's logic, but it's also sterile, so it's okay.
That's a great word for it, sterile.
Yeah, that doesn't win elections.
And I think we often mistake what we would think of as emotionality with passion, especially when it comes to women. I mean, we saw what happened in Congress this week with the Secret Service chief and then that crazy Fallon guy, Representative Fallon, Texas, I think. Really lost their shit. Now, I'm not a fan of the Secret Service, but I was really enjoying what the guy from the Secret Service was saying.
They were going full tilt boogie.
And I'm the emotional species that can't be responsible for
Right.
And it's just like these people are super emotional. Call Elon Musk cisgender, and he shit. Talk about DeSantis wearing lifts in his boots, and all of a sudden he's an unhinged psychopath, or me, and then he's an unhinged psychopath. And it's we mistake emotional for passion, and those people are emotional. We're passionate. And, I think that goes to a greater disease within our party of having people that are dispassionate, because in scientific communities, we reward being dispassionate. We always have. Because if you're seen as caring too much, then it could blind your, perspective, your objectiveness. Yeah. But I think that, and specifically with climate change, which is until COVID, probably the single discipline most fraught with controversy. We've seen a shift away from that. Like Michael Mann, he's considered to be one of the leading climatologists in the world. He's one of my mentors, one of my good friends. He has bucked the tradition and has really become active in politics because, as he sees it, and I agree, if you're not advocating for your science with passion and respect for what you do, why would you expect anyone else to? If you cannot advocate for what you do and how it impacts the world, in this case, why would anyone else? Yeah, you have to be out there. You have to be an advocate, because what you're advocating for is based on this dispassionate research that leads to one conclusion. And it's really, there's a lot of academic discussion about this, especially right now. We saw a lot of it in 2016 where people were like, oh shit, we should probably back up the National Climate Database Center. But now there are mechanisms in place that no one person can destroy it because of 2016. And now people are doing the thing that, everyone says not to do in fascist regimes, which is comply in advance. A lot of climate scientists are scrubbing their Twitters. They're, pulling back from being politically active because they're afraid.
Right.
And they are rightfully afraid. I don't mean for that to seem unjustified. Fucking the toddler who can't jump published a list of 4 people in the federal government that he personally wanted to fire. Yeah. These are private people. These are not people that are out, influencing politics. They're doing work, real work, meaningful work. They just threw their names out there like it was nothing. And those people become targets. They're not getting death threats. All 4 of them were women, first of all, and 3 of them were not white, which I'm sure was a total coincidence. And the thinking of that. But I'm going to be on one of those fucking lists. They said they're trying to root out, shit you not, partisan climate scientists who work for the federal government. Hello. I ran for Congress as a Democrat against Matt Gaetz, and I'm a climate scientist for the federal government. I'm going to be on that list. And so they're scared, but that's not going to make me shut up.
No, that's the thing.
I grew up poor. Missing money is nothing new for me. It sucks, but I'm not going to comply and downplay or even fabricate data to make this seem like it's less of an issue than it actually is to appease the overlord. I've been through that shit once before. I've already proven that you can send my ass to jail. I will face prison time and I'll go in and I'll do it gladly. Sick as fuck with COVID. But I will not comply. And
no, nor will I.
Too many people are afraid to do that. And I got to be honest, a lot of these Democratic influencer people wouldn't do that either. They would not risk sacrificing a minute of their time or $1 in their bank account if push came to shove. And that worries me.
It worries the hell out of me.
Like these voices that, what would you be willing to do? I mean, really be willing to do.
Yeah.
To fight this fight. And if it's not go to jail, go to prison or be killed, which is what I thought was going to happen to me in jail. I was 100% convinced they were going to kill me in jail. And I still think the only reason they didn't was because I caught COVID on the way down. And I had to be put in 24/7 monitoring isolation because they had no more med beds available. I left my family and I actually recorded it my friend told me to. And I was like, I'm never going to see my kids again. They are going to kill me. And left feeling like I knew that. And so not that everybody should have to feel that, but we may reach a point where we do. And even some of the people who got famous, I hate to take a personal shot here, even some of the people who got famous off my story would not be able to do that. You would. I feel like I'd trust you to do it. You'd like something. That's why I love you. And that's why I was like, we should do this again. You can tell if somebody's willing to actually lose something.
I appreciate that because I'm glad you pick up on that because I can't think of any better way to put it than this. I don't give a fuck, right? I'm not going to change a goddamn thing for this administration. Nothing. I'm not willing to do that. Yeah.
That's where I'm at with my family now, but that is absolutely not where I was 4 years ago. I mean, it's December 6th. So I was rated exactly 4 years ago tomorrow. And I wish, that's why I was always uncomfortable back then in 2020. People call me like a hero and all this. I was like, look, I'm just doing what I think is right. And I didn't feel like I was really in jeopardy until that moment, until they came to my house and pointed a gun at my head and told me to open the door. I was living in this naive bliss where that didn't happen to scientists in this country. And frankly, if I hadn't reported it, nobody would have fucking believed me. Anyways, DeSantis would have paid me out to be a crazy person. They would have said that all the cameras of every officer who came inside the house was malfunctioning that day, which they later claimed not a single officer who came into my house, 13, had a working body camera that day. They would have said I was crazy. Mm-hmm. But until that moment, I did not realize how much danger I was in, and I didn't realize how much danger my family was in. Everything after that has been a conscious choice knowing that threat. Before that, I was like, I'm telling people about the COVID numbers. Like, I built the system. I know where the back doors are to it. I'm going to tell everybody what's happening in full perspective with all of the things the state doesn't want to highlight. And what's the worst they could do to me? Trash me online? I'm like, oh, big fucking deal. I don't care. I had no idea. Now I do. And there have been, moments where I've walked away. Earlier this year, I walked away from Twitter for several months. I recently quit it. Although I've seen people like you be like, we can't see this space. And while I get it, they came after my kid again. So that was really, really difficult for me. I kind of walked away, but I'm in the process of deleting everything I've ever tweeted and restarting. Because
I understand both sides of this. I do.
Yeah.
I get it.
So a couple weeks ago, my son who's autistic, we've talked about this. Sometimes anybody who's a parent of an autistic kid knows that sometimes they have episodes. And when you're dealing with a 15-year-old autistic child, they can be violent in a way that you can't control yourself.
Yeah.
So I called for a medical transport to the Crisis Counseling Center here, which is a service that Maryland offers that Florida has never apparently thought was necessary. And these motherfuckers who stalked me online, who have been doing this for 4.5 years, without stop, found the dispatch log with my name spelled incorrectly, without my child's name mentioned in it. That is how much they scour the internet every single fucking day for this shit. Within 2 days, they had the dispatch log and they published it online. And I was like, you know what? They're making money off of this. They are monetized accounts. They're making money off of this. Fuck this shit. I'm out.
Yeah.
And I spent pretty much all of this week listening to people who were trying so badly just to reach other people. I literally had somebody told me, I was in Baltimore today with people from the governor's office. They were like, if we could just tell our stories, people wouldn't see immigrants as, these horrible people. I've been here for 30 years. My child sees doing this and that. And I sat there thinking, I have 300 and some thousand followers on Twitter. And I threw it away because it was inconvenient for me to have to emotionally deal with the DeSantis people. And what does that say about me? That these people they just want to be heard. And I'm like, I have this. And I said, fuck it. And I walked away from it.
I think it only, if it says anything, it only says it about that snapshot in time. I don't think it's indicative of you as a whole. I think it's
teetering between walking away pretty much all of this year. And I think that's because part of me wanted to move on from Florida. As soon as they finally dismissed the case, finally dropped it, so that on paper, the raid never happened. None of the single charge, because there was only one from that, never happened. It was dropped. I am free and clear. I passed an FBI background check to get my federal job. The relief I felt, my son is free. And after they tried to go after him, he's no longer on probation. I feel like, wait, they don't have a foot on my neck anymore. So I felt like in many, many ways, I had already vanquished my monster. DeSantis went down crashing and burning during his presidential campaign, in no small part to what I did with Trump. His whole, I'm going to be Secretary of Defense thing. You're really going to appoint somebody Secretary of Defense who hasn't spent a single fucking day in combat? Good luck with that. Right. Unmasked that whole bullshit and got to some of Trump's people to kind of explain why they were doing this in the first place, in which they forwarded to Trump. And although my civil lawsuit's still going on, it's very fucking clear I'm going to win it. Even the state knows that I'm going to win it. They tried to move for a motion of sovereign immunity recently. That's a public filing. And the judge, who is considered the biggest DeSantis fan in that district, said, fuck that. Are you kidding me? Went so far as to file a claim that said that the plaintiff was entitled to uncapped damages in her filing. And this was this week. And so I was like, I'm kicking their fucking ass.
Right.
And I vanquished my monster. He's done. He's toast. He's irrelevant. Yeah. He's a lame duck governor whose whole fascist experiment blew up in his face and everybody hates him. Even Trump. If he's still a Trump governor, maybe he'd have a future, but he doesn't because I've wrecked that. And so, me and a lot of other people worked on that. But
since that's uncapped, when you win that, you can send me a dinner invitation. I'll bring my wife. We'll go all out to eat.
But what's weird is that, as I've mentioned, I grew up so poor. Is when I started to get so much public support during COVID. God, it never sat right with me. Never. I went to bed and told one of the reporters, Chris Prasad from the Palm Beach Post, I was like, look, I have to keep doing this. People they trusted this thing I built for the state. And now they don't know where to go. Half the state thinks that it's propaganda. The other half thinks that I'm still serially running it and it's not true. They don't know what to do. So I'm going to keep doing it. And I'm going to do it better than I was ever allowed to do while I was there. And, maybe people care, maybe they won't. He published his story. I went to bed. The next day I woke up with $68,000 in my GoFundMe, which was more than I took home in a year. And I remember thinking, this is a joke. This is a joke, right? Because when I worked for the state, a whole year worth of work wasn't worth this, Yeah. And then it climbed to $250. And I was like, I would have kept doing this even if you guys hadn't given me anything. Like I had computer equipment I had to buy, so that was one thing. But I was like, this feels weird, and so I gave it all away, and my husband hated me for it. Like, if you're gonna run out of money, I was like, surely by now I'll have a job, and I had no idea what I was getting into, and so I gave it all away, and I gave it to very worthy causes, so mostly veterans groups, but
nice.
feeding the Gulf Coast and other organizations, and people that helped the kind of people that I was when I was a kid, and I didn't think I'd be broke, but I ended up broke. So whenever it comes about that I'm no longer broke, I already kind of, I'll say this without him hearing me, have a plan for what to do with it. And I'm going to buy a fucking house. That's the first thing. Buying a goddamn house. I want to own my house free and clear. Nobody's going to give me $1 worth of credit anyways. So I've got to buy it in cash. And after that, kids' college funds, all that, whatever they need, deposit for their future house, whatever. And then I'm going to give it all away again. So, I mean, like, some of these whistleblower organizations that were there for me when I was really down in like March of this year. One of my friends, John Barnett, he was one of the Boeing whistleblowers, had just killed himself. I was dealing with, there was a criminal investigation into one of my stalkers in Florida. There was a civil investigation into one of my stalkers in Florida, and it didn't seem to stop them. Nothing seemed to stop them. And the way they were going after my kid, I honest to God felt like my family would be safer if I wasn't here, if I didn't exist. And that was the closest to suicide I've ever been in my life. And I'm supposed to save this for the book. I think I told you that last time. I was like, I'm terrible at saving these for the book. It'll be with less drunkenness and more poise in the book. But I actually parked somewhere, and there was a pair of scissors in my husband's dashboard. And they weren't sharp enough. I was ready. I started crying, and then I went to the hospital, and I was like, I need help. Somebody help me. Took a week to detox off the internet, read a bunch of stuff from Taylor Lorenz, who really helped get me through it, and some retreat with Mark Ruffalo, and it was better. But, the people who did not stop calling me that night were the other whistleblowers that I've met through all of this. So like Tyler Schultz called me like 100 times. He was one of the Theranos whistleblowers who also tried to kill himself at one point. I mean, his grandfather was Secretary of State of the United States and the chief funder of Theranos, which was Elizabeth Holmes' scam project.
Right. Wow.
He's very open about it now. But when we were first starting to meet each other 4 years ago, he told me, it was like, my parents had to put their house up for mortgage to keep me out of jail, because that is how far this went. And there were people following me. There are people following the other girl who I know from Theranos, and I can't remember her name right now. It starts with an E, Emily, maybe. She was ready to kill herself. We both were, because we thought this was it. And he did not stop calling me that night. The head of Whistleblower for America, Jackie Gehrig, did not stop calling me that night. Jane Turner, who's the founder of National Whistleblower Center, would not stop calling me that night. And, you think it's useless to call and ring somebody over and over again. But I saw that on my phone. And they are the ones who made me go get help. And were one of the reasons why I took that big break from Twitter. And I think that whistleblowing is a whole thing. It is it's like going through Katrina. Only people who have actually been through it can really understand what it is. And that community saved my life. So they are getting a big chunk. Whatever I get to continue to support people like me. That come
and
to
I'm glad you're revealing this, because I don't think most people ever really even pause to think about the emotional aftermath for a whistleblower.
We don't, because
Just that alone.
most of them we only see through the media. So we see their stories covered, like Julian Assange. Have you ever actually read any tweets by Julian Assange? Most people haven't. Most people haven't read any letters by him. They've seen media coverage of him written by other people. Right. And what was kind of unique about my story was that all of it played out publicly. Every minute, every moment, I put it out there because I felt like I had nothing to hide. And the second that I was thrown out there, I was like, well, if you guys really want to know what's going down, let's really talk about it. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm kind of one of these ambassadors for the whistleblower programs now, is because I didn't shy away from how ugly and how dark it gets. Most people are ashamed of feeling suicidal. Like Tyler, it took him 10 years to see justice. I mean, Elizabeth Holmes was just convicted and sent to prison like last year. She tried to rebrand herself. She even got pregnant on purpose, I'm pretty sure, to try to get the jury to lighten her sentence a little bit. And they were like, fuck that, bitch. You're going to jail. She rebranded as Liz. And I think it was the New York Times wrote this really fluff article. It's like, oh, she wants you to call her Liz now. I was like, what are you doing? People don't realize this. There was a third Theranos whistleblower, Ian Gibbons. He killed himself. He fucking killed himself the day before depositions. And Erica Chung is the other one, and Tyler Schultz survived, but barely. They barely fucking survived. And it is hard. And that wasn't even a government organization. That was a private company. And each of them they had these family dynamics going on. They were young. They were just starting their careers, which meant that the value of what they had to say wasn't great. And I know something about that. I wasn't as young as Tyler, because he was like 25 when it happened. You know, I was 30, but I'm a woman, so I lost a few years worth of value coming forward. And people don't realize how hard that is. John Barnett killed himself after the second day of his depositions before he had to go back for the third day. And, you know, he drove up there for depots, and depots are considered to be the lowest moment in your case. Like, it is the opposite organizations or companies or government's chance to interrogate you about everything in your fucking life. And they do. Believe me, they fucking do. I can't talk about anything that happens in depositions yet because of legal issues. I'm not going to blow up the case for that, but they fucking do. And between day 2 and 3, he drove to his hotel. He sat there in his truck. And he was a real Southern boy, too, which is why I think we connected. And wrote some stuff on a scrap piece of paper and shot himself. And one of the last things that he wrote, the last message that he sent to the whole world, was that whistleblower protections were bullshit. That was the last thing he said to the whole world. And he was right. They're not going to get any better under Trump. But there's this glitz and glamour of being a whistleblower. I'm pretty. I mean, I feel like confident enough to be able to say that. I'm pretty. Not maybe last session that we did this because I didn't do my hair. I wasn't wearing makeup.
No.
To be, I look pretty.
No, you don't have to choose to be. You are.
Yeah. Well, I'm aware of the privilege that I have as a educated, highly educated, white, maybe woman is a double-edged sword, but being attractive and having degrees of communications, I can effectively say these things. So I have an advantage. But, you know, it is after the initial media frenzy fades, you are left alone, isolated, blacklisted. No government's going to want to hire you if you've already proven yourself to be a spiller of secrets. No for-profit company is either. Like, that's the last place you're going to end up. And something that, if you're like me, and you had spent more than a decade studying and working towards something, to be asked to set aside all of that work, especially for someone like me who grew up poor with nothing and had to like overcome some fucked up obstacles to get there, is heartbreaking. I mean, I'm close friends with Sharon Watkins, who's the Enron whistleblower. And we were having dinner one day, and there was another one of the Enron whistleblowers there. And she said, the other one told me, she's like, oh, you should really try to get back into climate science. And Sharon just looked at her and said, don't give her false hope. Dead in front of me, said, don't give her false hope. That's never going to happen. It's like, you need to find public speaking. You can become a life coach. She said, you will never go back to what you did. No one will trust you. And the whole Enron thing was like, what, in the 90s, early 2000s? And so this is a woman who she was Times Person of the Year, you know?
Right.
She fucking knows.
Yeah.
And I was caught at that moment, and this was the summer, between accepting that and acknowledging that and refusing to believe it. And I refused.
And that's a tough balance to do.
It really is, because you're like, they're like, oh, you're so young. I was like, I'm 35, so I'm not that young. I need to kind of get my shit together. I've got kids. And I was like, I remember listening to her and be like, you know what, she's right. But she doesn't have to be. And a month and a half later, I was hired as a climate scientist again for the federal government. So it's like, that to me was the moment I was like, my life still has value. And everything that I work for still matters.
Talk a little
Now,
bit
Trump
about...
may just like destroy Noah's.
That had to be a really validating moment for you, though, to know that you had gotten this, as you've already said, this really solid piece of advice from somebody who's been there, done that, and yet you demonstrated that even as good as your advice was in general, that when it comes to the specificity of me, I didn't have to subscribe to that. Yeah, right.
Nothing if not stubborn. But, right. You know, Jaren's from Texas. She's a Southern girl. So is the other lady that was with her. You know, Tyler grew up very privileged in California. I mean, like I mentioned, his grandfather was the single most decorated public servant in history. Like, across presidents, Secretary of State, Department of, like, all of it. This guy was one of the most powerful people in America. His own grandfather was against him when it came to Theranos. That is, I got to be honest, that's a whole other level of fucked up that, and I've told him this to his face, I don't think I could have dealt with. If I didn't have my full-fledged family support, I don't know what the fuck I would have done. If I had my grandfather meet me in a room where he had lawyers listening in the next room to try to record me saying something self-incriminating, I don't know what the fuck I would have done. And that's what he did. His grandfather did that to him. And, you know, it's because he bought into this lie of Elizabeth Holmes and her creative genius. Now, don't get me wrong, she was smart. But, I mean, her career before she went there was exceptional. Really was. But he refused to listen. His own flesh and blood refused to listen. When he said, look, I work in this fucking lab. I ran the tests. It's bullshit. He told me once near the very end, his grandfather said something to him like, it wasn't remorse necessarily, and it wasn't I'm sorry, but it was more of an acknowledgement that he had been taken advantage of. And that was all the closure he got before he died. And so, you know, that's how he left. His grandfather was like the most important person in his life.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And that's, wow.
That's hard.
That's tough.
That's hard. That is losing heart. If I had been isolated by my own family, I have no idea. I was lucky because I had an established academic career before this. I had already won awards in my field. I was getting national recognition, even by the Trump White House administration, for what I was doing in Florida. I had something to prove my worth when shit went down.
Yeah.
And had my family, I had my whole academic field behind me. They all issued public letters of condemnation, both when I was fired and when I was rated. If I didn't have that, I would be like Ian Gibbons, I'd be dead. And, you know, it's people really like, oh, we love our whistleblowers. Do you really? Have you followed up on any of them? Have you checked in how hard it is for Reality Winner, who's had 3 movies made about her, by the way, in the last year and a half, cannot legally profit off any of them, not a cent, as part of her plea agreement, served the longest sentence ever under the Espionage Act for leaking should have been public documents about how Russia actually interfered with the 2016 campaign. Nothing that she said was untrue, but she had served the longest sentence in U.S. history under the Espionage Act. She can't find a fucking job because she's a convicted felon. And I've been trying to, whether wanted or not, assist in this public campaign to get her pardoned because she served the fucking time. She served our country, as a member of the armed forces, and then for years afterwards. She should be able to start life over. She's still young, and by the way, she's fucking brilliant and hilarious and kind of like bizarrely like me, which is probably why I like her so much, and also why we clap a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we had this very similar, I was always in trouble as a kid. I was always different. I wanted something more. I wanted to see the world. I wanted to learn these languages. And I love and adore her. But she actually went to prison for that shit. And she did it fully knowing that what she did was worth it. How many people who know her story, have watched her movies, have written to the Biden administration to pardon her, or, sent her money on Venmo, or done anything else to actually help her? Because as soon as the glitz and the glam fades, there's still a person that's left to deal with the fallout of committing truth-telling, which is what Dan Ellsberg called it. And which goes back to the Democratic Party thing is, he told me once, he was, sorry, I still get.
No, it's.
Losing Dan Ellsberg was hard, really hard. I never imagined in my life that someone as important and influential in American history would know who I was, much less think that much of me. He said I actually inspired him more than Ed Snowden, and he loved Ed Snowden. I don't, but he did. And every time something happened, I went straight to him. And yeah, he passed a few years ago. He used to tell me, he said, the problem is that people are afraid to be called names. He said Democrats especially are afraid to be called names. And if you're too afraid to be called a bad name, then you are not cut out for this shit. I mean, that man, he went to prison. He was being faced with the Espionage Act as well. Ransacked his psychiatrist's office. They tried to drug him, which also happened to me before a major peace conference, so that they tried to drug him with LSD so that he would seem delusional and crazy and maybe strip down and go nuts. And he said, if you're too afraid to be called bad names, you should just quit now, because that is the least of the things that you could do wrong in this world. And I think about that about Democrats all the time. I was like, you're afraid about anonymous accounts, probably Russian bots on social media, not real life, flooding your comments every time you mention me in a story. I mean, because that's what happens. I mean, I have that, at least on Twitter, nowhere else but Twitter. This whole apparatus dedicated to do nothing but attacking any mention of my name, to the point where somebody who works at the Tallahassee Democrat told me, we don't cover you because we don't want to deal with the bullshit that happens when we do. And I remember I was like, well, thanks for being honest, which was refreshing in a way, but at the same time, like, excuse me, what's your fucking job? And, that happens. And I've noticed that even a lot of my allies online will back away, because as soon as they mention me, and you've probably experienced this too, the same
I have
10 or so accounts show up almost in succession. Sordo, who's the account that's run by Brian Griffin, who is Ron DeSantis' deputy press secretary, and then a whole bunch, Dan Goldwasser, Cheryl Renaud, all of these people that have the police and criminal charges filed against them will show up with a bunch of bullshit. And if we are yielding our supposed heroes to a bunch of fucking internet trolls, and that's enough to scare us off, we are fucked. We are truly, truly fucked.
I could not agree more. And that is the gist of, I think at first, when I first started my newsletter, there were a lot of people that, even though they subscribed, they weren't sure the connection between what it was about, which was building resilience and overcoming your anxiousness and your excessive worry, and just kind of getting your emotional shit together and
Well,
being able to stand up to more, right? And they were trying to make that link to politics and this, and my position on that then and will continue to be, until you can get to the point where it doesn't matter what insult, what full word somebody throws at you, you're like, you know what, fuck you. I don't have a problem with that. The problem I have is if you try to undermine the truth I'm telling, then that irks me. Right. Now, if you want to attack me, you want to attack my family, who you don't even know, that's fine. And so that's my emphasis there. And I always said that winning an election is every bit as much about being able to drive your own bus emotionally, because, and I think we are at a moment right now that underscores this, when people are starting to back off because of fear, right? Yeah. Trump's about to come in, people are backing off. Right. And it's like, look, that's where having your head screwed on tight and being able to regulate your own emotions, that's what gets us to the point where we can say we saved democracy, because we said, fuck it, I'm not backing down because I've got enough. I can regulate my emotions enough. I can acknowledge my fear, but I can acknowledge it while I'm saying, fuck off. It's not, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but the problem is with that is that the costs are not equal. Like
no, they're not.
Today, there were these, I just found out about it, even though it happened days ago, these two George Mason students whose house was raided over alleged graffiti that appeared on campus on the ground somewhere, which I thought for sure if it was that bad, I'd be able to find a story about it or a mention about it. Nothing. I mean, I checked the ADL, I checked everywhere. Nobody shared a picture of this alleged graffiti. Two female students, one was a master's student at George Mason. One was an undergrad. There was a third kid in the family who was already a graduate and an alumni and works in a very prominent position. George Mason is a very, hoity-toity. I can't think about Syracuse. It's like, you know what I mean.
I do.
It's not. It's a different cut from a different cloth.
Yes.
But the oldest brother and the two younger sisters were all presidents of Students for Justice in Palestine. And a couple days ago, their house was raided by the FBI because George Mason forwarded something to the FBI that said that there was some kind of graffiti on the ground. First of all, you don't fucking raid somebody with the FBI with over a dozen officers without a warrant, which is, for me, kind of a personal thing, because of graffiti. You better have more than that. They rounded them, the whole family up, the parents, everybody else in the house, put them in the living room for hours, refused to show them a warrant, stole all their electronics, and didn't tell them about anything that was happening. And I was like, this is deja vu. In Florida, 4 years ago from tomorrow, police showed up to my house, armed, like guns drawn. One was pointed at my face through the window next to my door. Told me to open the door. Did not have a warrant. Waited 3 hours while they went and got a warrant. Rounded us up in the living room at gunpoint. Kept us there for hours while they waited for it. Handed me a list of all the electronics that they had taken on their way out. And there was nothing I could fucking do about it. Because of an alleged text message sent to former colleagues telling them to, and this is a quote, speak out and be honest. A charge that took 2 fucking years for them to dismiss. 2 fucking years. And when I was reading the story about these 2 girls, I was like, this sounds like, oh, it's complicated. No one in that family, the second that they ever hear somebody knock on the door, will ever be okay again.
No, I agree.
They don't realize that, but like, if somebody knocks on my door, everybody in my family hides. My 6-year-old daughter will run upstairs and run under her bed and hide. And she was like 2 when that happened. And they will never feel safe in the George Mason community ever again. even though they're not charged with a crime, and it's not even clear that they're being investigated for a crime, George Mason suspended both of those students, both of them, the same day. And, you know, there have been 80 different, I think it was 80 organizations and universities signed letters saying, like, no, bad job. But when I tried to share this online, and I got to tell you, I'm not a conspiracy theorist type person. That shit is being so suppressed. Anytime you mention anything involving Israel or Gaza, it's like the view count, the stats on it are a fraction of what I normally get. And I mean, you're talking about if I went to Twitter and, you know, I had 350 whatever thousand followers, maybe 3,000 would see them, maybe two.
Right.
That's it. And I experimented with this today. It was my first post back on Twitter. And I was like, the entire country, actually the entire international community was up in arms when this happened to me. Because I was raided without a warrant for speech that the governor did not approve of, for something that doesn't sound like it should remotely be a crime. And because I was going against what the state narrative was. The whole world rose up against that. I mean, I did Channel 4 in Britain, I did Australia, I did New Zealand, I did Greece, you know, I did France. And yet, no major news outlets are even covering what happened to these girls 30 miles away. And to me, it's like, if we decide that we're only outraged when these injustices happen to somebody we agree with, then we're no better than them.
Right.
And I mean, I obviously fall on the side of being pro-Palestine, but even if I didn't, if these had been girls who were raided because they hung up, you know, the hostages posters all over the place, I would be like, this is not acceptable. I mean, if it had been that situation, honestly, I think there would have been congressional investigations. The university would have been put on notice of being defunded, and the whole situation would be different. But it makes me very reticent to speak when I'm seeing young girls. And I mean, I'm in my late 30s now. If you're over 35, you can say late 30s. So for anybody, for me, that's like 25 and younger, you know, like a kid. That's what happens when you get in your mid 30s. Everybody 25 and younger is a kid. These girls will never be okay again. Ever. And I speak that from experience. Neither were their parents or any other children who were there. And for what? For fucking graffiti.
And I think when we look at your situation,
better been like, I'm going to kill so-and-so at X time and X date to warrant such. Because when somebody actually called my husband's cell phone and left a voicemail threatening to fucking kill me, the literal words, it was 3 sentences, was, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill your family. You're going to die, motherfucker. You think they raided his house? No, they showed up, knocked on the door, and he was like, oh yeah, I did that. And they were like, oh, well, don't do it again. And that was it. So this is a strategic weaponization of law enforcement.
Sure it is.
Intimidate people who go against an idea that the government, including Democrats in Congress, have decided is not an acceptable point of view. And that is scary. Because
how many situations like
I'm not an acceptable point of view. Does that make it okay to throw me in jail again? I was like,
how many situations like yours do we think we are going to see nationwide under Trump?
Oh, holy fuck, I hope. Well, I will say H5N1 is scary.
That was my next question.
Dr. Rick Bright, who is one of the nicest people I've ever met, is super supportive. He was a federal whistleblower for COVID-19. He was on the original task force. He was trying to warn people that I'm managing this so well, and they came after him. He's great now. He's at the Rockefeller Institute. He's making waves. He's been sounding the alarm about H5N1 for 13 months. And he's gone to the White House. He's gone to the Biden administration. And essentially what has happened is they said, we can't deal with another pandemic right now. Not in the sense of logistics, but as publicity. And that has allowed this to go unchecked. And this is where most Democrats are like, okay, we don't want to listen to her anymore. Because I talk about things like this. But most of the deaths during COVID happened under Biden. And the 22 whole show at Congress where they like actually did not allow people to wear masks on camera because they wanted the appearance that they had defeated COVID, even though clearly, as we're seeing with current numbers, we did not. Because that was their promise, was to end COVID pandemic, which was an unrealistic promise to begin with. They should have just promised to deal with it in an effective manner, not to, tidy this up, because the truth is that by the time Biden was elected, that containing it was not possible. It's been really frustrating to watch the same people who put their lives, their careers on the line for COVID be ignored, be ostracized for doing the same thing about H5N1. I mean, 90%. That is a huge number. I don't know if people who listen know how many birds we have that we eat that are in stock. 90% had to be euthanized in the last year because of this virus. That is how widespread it is. It is fucking scary. We've had our first few cases of non-direct contact with animals in California, Oregon, and Canada. So people who don't work on dairy farms or work on poultry farms who have been infected from person-to-person contact. Now, this could end up dying out. The virus could fuck up and sizzle out like 99.9% of viruses do. But what if it doesn't? And do we really want Trump to be president during another pandemic? I mean, that is so frustrating.
Well, especially when you keep in mind that the heat, he knows the heat that he caught after he left office and how much that tarnished him for this last
he
run.
Lost because of COVID.
Sure,
not because of the crazy shit or the almost war with Iran and Syria and pretty much the whole Middle East. He lost because of COVID.
Sure. So then what his approach is going to be if we face another pandemic. He's going to
just fucking euthanize everybody who gets sick with it right away. Who knows?
Right.
I mean, it hurt him so badly. And I don't think he intends on not running again. I mean, I think that's pretty understood from his own statements that he plans on running again. But he might just euthanize anybody who gets sick to try to quash the spread of it, which is A, not going to work, and B, one of the most inhumane things you could do, and C, partially what China was alleged to have done at some point in their thing, which is a human rights violation and all kinds of other problems. But most importantly, does not work. Because Florida, by the time they were willing to admit they had cases internally, we knew there was community spread. Because we had been so focused on testing people from Asia that we had missed that there was already community spread throughout Florida. The first case that we had recorded was community spread. And we did not admit that publicly until weeks later. And ultimately ended up being one of the big debates that got me fired. But the first transported case we had was somebody who had recently gone to Turkey and Israel. We weren't even looking in the right fucking places. So this whole China focus, and this is something I have 2 chapters in my book related to, the xenophobic thing about China drew all of our attention to that when it really should have been elsewhere. Because by the time that China was reporting it, it was already in the Middle East. It was already, in parts of Europe. And we had this triage mentality because of Trump. And he absolutely was the one who steered this. He said it's a China virus. He said that right off the bat. That's who we prioritize testing. I mean, the first person who died, their recent travel was to Jamaica. And that was it. So, and at least in Florida. And so we were looking in all the wrong places because we had somebody in charge who fundamentally did not understand what we were dealing with, or even had the capacity to understand the field that we were dealing with. And That's dangerous. It's incredibly dangerous. And if somebody goes and tells Trump, look, we killed 90% of the birds, but 92% are still infected, he'll probably just say, kill them all again, or what, don't import birds or whatever irrational things he thinks is causing it, because this is a virus that originated here. Much like the 1918 influenza, which was a virus that originated, I think, from either Nebraska or Kansas and met up with the seasonal flu in World War One, and then just caused mass death throughout the world, and was dubbed the Spanish flu because the Spanish were not involved in that war.
Right.
And,
I think it started in Kansas.
Kansas or Nebraska. It was one of those two at a military base, at a pig farm.
Right.
It was swine flu. Yes. And soldiers who were going out in 1918 to, in the trenches, which trench warfare is a whole, I'll let the military people speak as how awful that was, let the disease spread like wildfire. But Spain was not involved in that war. Spain was in the midst of its own civil war. And so Spanish newspapers were the only places that were not propagandized by either the Axis or the Allies and published about all of these soldiers' just mass deaths. I mean, we're talking about millions of people just dropping dead in these trenches. And so that's why we call it the Spanish flu, because the only way that you could hear about it was through Spanish newspapers. And they had to be smuggled too, because the United States tried to stomp that news out, like the fuck out. Pretty much the only news you could get at that point from the 1918 flu was in like the two major newspapers that were there, like the New York Times, the Washington Post, or officially government sanctioned like theater propaganda videos. And so Spanish were like the only way you'd find out. So we call it Spanish flu. It was the United States flu. It was the United States pandemic. And so is this one. And Trump is an idiot. He's surrounded by idiots. He just appointed RFK to the head of the NIH, which he also plans to defund. So kind of wondering if RFK's pissed about that, because he's like,
kind
wait,
of a conflict.
You just defunded? Yeah. Yeah, I know, right? Like, that's like the third agency that's on the chopping block right after like the VA and my agency. So, but having people in charge of the CDC, like Jay Barasha or whatever his name is, a vaccine skeptic or whatever he calls himself. That's way worse than where we were in 2016.
Oh my God.
Anthony Fauci was the head of the NIH back then, and he had been there for like 30 years. And no, he didn't always handle things perfectly, but he handled them as well as anybody could have been expected to. He was not a great spokesperson. But in science, we have a saying that, the top expert in the field is not necessarily the top person that you want explaining the field to the public. But, he survived Trump. He was there the whole time. And, which is incredible when you think, looking back at it, I don't think that would happen.
It really is.
But, he stayed there the whole time. But
which to me, that always spoke to me as much of a beef as Trump now says he had with him. The fact that he kept him the whole time tells me he knew how badly he needed him.
Yeah, he knew it was serious. And every instinct that he had to like fire him when he embarrassed him or when he laughed at him, at least somebody in that circle was like, you can't fire him. We actually kind of need this guy to handle this shit. I don't know who that magical person was. Probably the person who penned the anonymous op-ed in the New York Times that they got rightfully panned for doing. Maybe that person's still there. Maybe they're not. But having Jay, whatever his name is, run the CDC, that's not a good sign.
No, not at all. What would you say to people who were in, or people who are in your position in Florida, across the United States, when they come face to face with a situation like yours? Looking back, what would your advice be to them?
So I have some stock advice, and I'm usually paid like $5,000 a pop to deliver sober. So I'm going to say that I'm getting paid like $10,000 to go give this advice in Scotland in February.
Well, this is the rum version.
Mama got to pay the bills. But, and I kind of break this down in one of my videos. The way you have to protect yourself first. Everything that you know, everything that you have, back it up. Off-site. So if you have like Outlook as your state agency, you can export your entire fucking inbox and put it into a CSV file and email it to yourself, to your private Gmail, to have a copy of it. That saved my ass so much in this lawsuit. I cannot even tell you. The second that I started to think that things were off because of things that had happened previously in my life, I was like, blind copy myself on this email because it feels like I'm being told to do something that isn't kosher. And the first rule to protect yourself is back everything up off of their servers. You can run into complications if you end up backing up sensitive information. So I always recommend people email their supervisor and say, hey, is it okay if I work from home today? My computer's not working, blah, blah, blah. Boom, you're done. You're covered. Yeah, everything that you emailed yourself is good.
Right.
You have to protect yourself. And I would say collect enough that if anybody ever questions your version of events, you can prove everything that you're saying. And be sure that you can prove everything that you're saying. I've never said something publicly that I could not back up. I even went so far as to, in the early 2020 period, being like, I didn't think DeSantis had anything to do with this. It's like, he wasn't in these email chains. I was surprised as anybody else that he was involved with it. To see him attacking me in front of the vice president was literally paralyzing. Like, I remember the moment I saw it. I was in a hotel. This was my first day off since February, I think, of that year, January, February. My parents had lost their house in a tornado in April. And they were staying in hotels. So we went to go see them. And I went downstairs in the lobby, and there was MSNBC, there was CNN, and there was Fox News, the obligatory channels at the mini bar. And my face was on every fucking one of them. And I remember thinking, what the fuck just happened? Like, I hadn't said anything to anybody. Why am I the thing? And luckily I had not done my hair and my makeup, and I had on because it was summer, and so nobody recognized me. Eventually somebody did, and they spit at me, which was crazy. But protect yourself. Make sure that you're fully protected, because you have no fucking clue what you're getting into. You might think you know. You don't know. This could go way deeper than you ever imagined. Like, I didn't think it had anything to do with the governor's office at first, and it did. And, now Jared Moskowitz, who's a sitting congressman who was the head of the DEM at the time, is a witness in my lawsuit. And that's public information because all this stuff is filed publicly. And, so I have sitting congresspeople in my lawsuit because that is how far this went. And so.
And is he a witness on you? A witness for you? Is he a witness for you?
There are witnesses. Yeah. Because the previous conversations that, like I said, I backed up, because you should back up everything. If somebody's like, hey, can we talk in person about this? As soon as they walk out, you need to email that person a record of everything they just asked you to do. And say, hey, thanks for coming by my office. Type. You just asked me to do XYZ. Please confirm that this is what you want me to do, so that you have a record of it. Because that, I cannot express how much that has saved my life. Feeling that something was off and not being afraid to create some physical record that had happened. It's extremely important. They moved my office to the corner multi-window office. I was like in a cubicle next to the elevator before, and it was no windows. It was miserable, and I felt like I was in a cave. They moved me to the corner office to take over the former head of epidemiology's office so that we would email less and so that there'd be less paper trail. Which to me, at the very second they did it, I was like, I'm going to take the corner office. I mean, half the staff's at home anyway, so what's the matter? And I like Windows. But I'm still going to email and document every single thing that you guys are asking me to do. So if you feel like something is off, trust that. Like, trust that instinct. If you feel like somebody is watching you, make sure you document that somehow. Record conversations depending on the laws in your state about, one or two or all party recording. Because even if you can't use it in court, that doesn't mean you can't use it in the media. And that's important. And so just create documentation of everything. Honest. It sounds simple and it sounds somewhat kind of reductive. But if you have to sue the state, or God forbid they kill you, throw you in jail, there's something there that can prove that what you said happened. And I wouldn't be winning this lawsuit without it.
I was going to ask you, had you not have documented as you did, you'd be in a much different position.
I mean, even the things that I didn't intend to be documents, like when I texted my mom and my sisters on the way home from the reopening weekend whole debacle, and I said that I was exhausted and that people were going to get killed, and I didn't sign up for that. I never intended that to be a record. But in my lawsuit, it's proof that as soon as shit went down, I reached out to the people that I trusted most in the world, my family, and told them what was happening, and that I was torn about what to do. My sister kind of became famous from it because she told me to call in with explosive diarrhea. And and I said that it wouldn't work. Like, they didn't have anybody to run the shit afterwards. She was like, nobody questions explosive diarrhea. And so there was like this whole self-fandom with my sister that developed. The none of them want fame. They don't want to be attached to any of this. You know, that's the other part of this is like my nephew was just going through this whole fundraiser thing for his high school. And my older sister sent out a text saying, oh, can everybody share? And I was like, you sure you want me to share it? And she was like, oh, no, not you. I meant everybody else. And I was like, I can't even do like normal people things anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I can't share my nephew's popcorn fundraiser because I know that the stalkers that follow me will figure out what school he goes to. And then they'll figure out what school my sister teaches at. And then they'll harass her. They'll harass the staff. She could lose her job. And I think a lot of times we don't realize that that's part of this whole public life thing. It should not be. There are laws already on the books that prevent that kind of harassment. There should not be exemptions for people like me who are quasi-famous or somewhat famous or have a social media following, because I don't even do like regular media anymore. I walk back from all that. That should not make that kind of shit okay. If I was a normal person, somebody did that, they'd throw their ass in jail. If somebody went and tracked down my sister and my nephew because of his popcorn fundraiser and because he was associated with me and harassed the school, they'd be a fucking crazy person and they'd be thrown in jail. But because they're paid by DeSantis, and he's the governor and I'm famous, nothing happens. And again, if Democrats weren't fucking cowards, they would enforce some of these laws. But every time I report them to the FBI, they're like, oh yeah, we really gave him a talking to. I was like, you threw me in jail. Not the FBI, but you put me in jail for a text message that 2 years later you had to admit that I didn't send. And you won't do anything about these people threatening to kill me or scouring the internet every 24 hours for every possible combination that you could misspell my name so that you could find a dispatch in which I called for help for my son, my autistic minor son, who's a private citizen, does not have social media, so that you could publish it and make me look like a bad mother.
It's reached a level of insanity. I mean, it really has. Anybody who wants to put themselves out in front to lead in any kind of way, they really have to think of these things. And
you have to know. And that's the thing. I didn't know and I didn't consent. I was thrown out there. Like, I had not done a public interview. I had not made a public statement. I was hiding in a hotel room, worried that guys in Russian, like, traditional hats were going to, like, push me out of a window or something when DeSantis was with the vice president in front of the whole fucking world live, saying that I was a sexual predator, which was never true. That was never a thing that happened. And the six-figure job that I had lined up just ghosted me. And, you know, it's like, in Florida, you cannot sue a public official for defamation if it is considered within the course of their job duties. Believe me, I've had these discussions with my lawyers over and over again. They've exempted themselves from defamation suits. The theory is that your political opponents should not be able to sue you into oblivion if you're running a campaign against them for things that are just completely like made up. I was not a political opponent. I was not a political person, in any shape of the form. But yet, because that was Ron DeSantis' official duties, he can say literally whatever he wants.
Anything,
he could call me a Nazi. He could say that I showed up to like Antifa meetings, which, it wouldn't be that bad. But, that would be less harmful to me than what he did say. He can literally say whatever he wants. And there's nothing anybody can do about it. And it's a powerless feeling. And I have to admit, sometimes people feel rageful. Like they want something to break. They want to break something over what has happened to them because it's so wrong. But I have the benefit of having the public. And I have to wonder, and this kind of goes back to the whole healthcare guy, the DDD guy. If I didn't, what would I have done? Would I be like Ian Gibbons at Theranos and just giving up? Or would I be like the DDD guy taking shit into my own hands? I was extremely privileged to have the audience and the platform that I did. Most people don't have that. No. That's why I'm coming back to Twitter, which is a nice preface to that. Because instead of telling my story, which there's a movie about, there's going to be a second movie about, people have heard it. It's in like Cosmo. It's in the Miami Herald. Oh my God. I want to stop talking about it. Instead of doing that, I'm going to start telling other people's stories, because I spent the entire day today listening to people saying, if someone would just understand why I came to this country and what I want for my life, what I want to do for this country, maybe they wouldn't see me as the enemy. Those are the stories I want to tell. I want to tell the stories of people like me who don't look like this, who don't get that attention. Because poor is poor, yes, but white is white. And white always comes with privileges. And, this happened to a fellow geographer. I don't know if we talked about this earlier in the year or if that had happened yet. With another geographer who worked for the state of Florida, who turned whistleblower against DeSantis and attracted his ire. I made a lot of videos about him. I posted a lot about him. He blew the whistle on a subversive plan to basically turn public state lands that were protected into golf courses for rich people. And he was specifically tasked with designating the area that would be turned into protected land into golf courses. And he was like, you know what? This is fucked up. And so he leaked it to the media. He was fired for unauthorized communication with the media, which is a weird thing. And the first thing I did when I heard that story, I reached out to him. I was like, get the fuck out. I was like, if you do a TV interview, they will come after you. If you tweet about it, they will come after you. And you think that it'll last like a week or whatever, it will not stop. It has been 4.5 fucking years for me. Every day. Everything I say is tracked by these people online. Everywhere I go is tracked by these people online. They search my face in Google Images to see if I appear on things, to find me, to criticize and attack the organizations that I'm associated with. It will not fucking stop. I helped him raise like $230,000 and he got the fuck out of Dodge. And I was like, if I had me back in 2020, that's exactly what I would have done. Raise the money, get the fuck out. Never look back, because this, I still don't know if it's worth it. And I think that's like 4 years ago, if you had asked me on this evening before the raid, I would have told you absolutely. Yeah. Having like Rebel Cole from Florida Atlantic or whatever harass me and make weird, creepy rape threats. It's like, what is that? What is that really? I'm making a difference. I'm telling people what's actually happening and they're informed, which is all I ever wanted. But 4 years and 1 day ago, that completely changed. And he listened to me, which was great. Because now he's safe and his daughter is safe. And he's got $230,000 to figure out what the fuck to do next with his life. Which I don't have. So,
right.
my brother.
Well, I think that's probably the most honest answer that anybody could give is that I, depending on the moment of the day, I question even now whether it was worth it because most things aren't that crystal clear. You're going to have those, peaks and troughs where there are days where you're like, fuck yeah, it was worth it. I'd do it again in a minute. And then you're going to have those.
See, I'm fighting the power, everything's
Sure.
worth it. And then when you find your kid sleeping on the floor crying,
Yeah.
you're like, this isn't worth it.
Right.
This isn't worth it. I knew my kid was broken the day fucking night it happened. There's video of him coming into the house with his fist gripped, looking down because he's too afraid to look up. He was 11 years old. An autistic kid who had struggled his whole life with ADD and ADHD. We didn't have the money to have the autistic testing done yet at that point, but we did later. Now has trauma to add to it, and he has absolutely struggled. And DeSantis people have chosen to make that a public struggle. So even as a teenager, he can't go through already difficult things, autism, ADD, ADHD by himself. He has to now have his trauma laid out for the whole world. And that really makes it hard. When my 6-year-old daughter goes to school and she sees the school resource officer, which is a cop, for all of last year, they had to create a cubby for her where she could run and hide because she was so afraid the school resource officer was going to kill her that she needed a safe place to hide. She used to hide like under this table, but there were like a bunch of cords under it. So I had a special meeting. I was like, oh, we should set up like a blanket and a little cubby and, put the cords away so she has somewhere to run and hide from a school resource officer. And she still struggles with that. She was only in the first grade. She was 2.5 when that happened. And, you go back and you look at the video and she's in my husband's arms and she's just looking around and you think maybe she's too little. Maybe she's too small, too innocent to have that imprint upon her. But there are periods that she goes through where every single day she asks me if somebody's a nice police officer or not. Because even though nobody said that to her, she saw it. And, and that goes to like research that we have on children who are exposed to, gun crime and violent crime and all kinds of different types of environments and the long-lasting impacts that can have on communities. And that's why recidivism and continued problems continue within those communities. Yeah. And I just think my daughter was 2.5 years old. One event it's been 4 years.
It's a deep etching.
With her that strongly.
Yeah.
Like, imagine all the kids out there who don't have the whole world watching video of them going through that outrage. And so I felt really guilty today about quitting Twitter about that stuff. But that's why the first thing I posted back after leaving for several weeks was the story about those 2 students at George Mason, because I was like, if these were 2 Jewish students who had been raided for posting, the hostages posters, there would be congressional investigations. There would be threats of defunding George Mason. There would be all kinds of shit. We have to do better than that. Because the second that we allow tyranny to happen to people we don't like, we are inviting it to happen to us.
Right.
And speaking as somebody who's been there and come through it, you have no idea what you're inviting into your life. You think, oh, this will never happen to me. I'm a law-abiding person. So, guys, I was raided at gunpoint for an alleged text message that they took 2 years to dismiss the charge. It doesn't fucking matter if you are a saint.
Right.
They will find a reason, like you said, 3 felonies, and they will hurt you. They will find a way to hurt you the way it hurts you most.
And what people often forget, if they haven't been through something like that, is people always say, well, in this country, you're innocent until proven guilty. What they leave out of what they leave out of that is that until that time, you have legal expenses piling up in that period where you're innocent until proven guilty, right?
Oh, yeah. I get trashed all the time for how much money I raised. I was like, you realize that I had to pay a $50,000 retainer just to get my lawyer to take the case. $50,000 retainer. That doesn't include all the other charges that came after that. I'm very lucky in that my legal team on the whistleblower case is working on contingency or confinement, whichever. There's too much wrong now for me to remember which word.
One of those C words, right?
One of the C words that implies that they get a cut of whatever I win.
Yeah.
So I don't have to pay them anything now. And they've been working basically for free for 4.5 years, which more than anything is a testament to their confidence in the case, because if they didn't weren't convinced that they were going to win and they weren't convinced that they were going to win a lot of money, they wouldn't bother. Right. But for my criminal case, there's only one of two outcomes. It's dropped or you're convicted or plead guilty. Either way, that lawyer doesn't profit off of anything. So they require that money up front. And that's what I had to do. I literally had to transfer $50,000 in one day to this guy to represent me. And it was ultimately dismissed. So money well worth it. But my God, the 2 years that it took to get to that place, they hung that over me as a threat the entire time. That if I jaywalked, if I failed a drug, I wasn't allowed to drink for 2 years. I mean, well, that is mean.
That's proof that you're right there's proof you're not innocent till proven guilty.
I know, right? Like your Second Amendment rights, you think you have those until you're proven guilty? No, you don't. The second that you're charged with a felony, you have to surrender all firearms. You cannot be in a house with firearms. You're not allowed to hold or possess firearms. Your Second Amendment rights, boom, gone. You cannot drink. You cannot, smoke weed. Even though weed is legal in most states in the United States, because I was charged in Florida, I could not smoke anywhere in the country. And I never have. I'm still a virgin when it comes to that, because I was afraid, I get drug tested and I get fired. But the day that I decide to do that will be very interesting. But a lot of your rights are gone the second that they arrest you and charge you with a felony. And 2 years. 2 fucking years. They tried to play their heaviest hand 3 weeks before the election in 2022, the primary, and told me that I'd have to admit guilt, drop my whistleblower lawsuit, which, by the way, is considered extremely unethical, to use a criminal suit to force someone, at least on paper, you would never admit that you were doing that, to drop an unrelated, pre-existing civil suit, all this other shit. I would apologize to the Department of Health. I went there in August. I was already kicked off the ballot because of this whole other thing. I didn't even know if I was going to be eligible for the ballot. Didn't know what the fuck was going to happen. We went into that meeting with the state and they laid out those demands. And I literally said, go fuck yourself. And my lawyer, they're like, sweet dude, what the fuck are you doing? I was like, you want me to drop my whistleblower lawsuit? Is this because I'll win? Go fuck yourself. You think you have this leverage because I allegedly sent a text message telling people to speak honest and, whatever. I was like, you can't prove that it even came from my computer. You didn't even take my router, which would have been the only evidence that you needed to prove that it did, but you didn't take that. Instead, you sent a warrant in for my OneDrive where I had backed up a bunch of data, including a roster of publicly accessible contact information. You can get that from a public records request of people working on the ESFA. I was like, you don't have shit. And I literally said, go fuck yourself. That was the patience that I had with them. About a month later, they came back and all of those stipulations were gone. And my lawyer, he told me, he was like, I have never in my career, of 40 years practicing law, had a client say to the state, to their face, go fuck yourself and get a better deal out of it. And I was like, well, that's
one reason I can call you friend, though. You have to know that, because
I was like, well, this is not your normal case. And I'm not your normal client. He was like, I'm starting to realize that.
Yeah.
And so it's like, and we've talked about this before. If I hadn't grown up the way that I did, and I hadn't struggled so much, I don't think I would have found that inner strength to literally the state of Florida threatening me with prison. They were literally coming at me. We will send you to prison for years. And say to them, I looked that bitch dead in the eye and said, go fuck yourself.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because whereas somebody listening, or somebody, if it's something that you or I post online, somebody might just see the profanity element of that. But what needs to be addressed is that it is an attitude. It is a mind.
It's not that big of a deal. Okay, I might be more flexible with my language and profanity in proximity to alcohol, but at the same time, it's been proven statistically that people with high IQs curse more. And because we recognize that these are expressive ideas that emphasize a particular feeling or emotion that instantly resonates with who we're talking to. And plus, I grew up in the South and nobody gives a shit. And, I didn't grow up at dinner parties where you weren't allowed to say these things. And I think if you talk to most people who have struggled, they're going to tell you their story and it's going to be laden with profanity because that is the way we learn emphasis. And
it is.
Maybe not. If you've ever seen me live on TV, I never curse. It's like a switch. So I know Madeline is specifically talking about this one thing. I'm going to tell you about this one thing for 2.5 minutes, and you're going to understand it, and it's going to be in an accessible way. And then I'm going to go back to Twitter and start cursing again about, how fucked up the whole capitalism system is.
people are very often. I think the place where I've been asked the most, people who just knew me from my Twitter feed would watch some of my podcasts where there might be entire episodes where I don't use so much as one curse word. It's very contextual. With it depends on the person that I'm talking to. I did an episode yesterday with Anthony Scaramucci. That was a very different context than the one with you. And
I make people curse. You don't say bad words, potty mouth. But that's the truth. It's today we went through this whole storytelling thing. And everybody had to boil down basically their life story into 3 minutes. And despite what probably most of the people who I work with thought I was going to say, I did not tell a story related to Florida or COVID or the governor or anything like that. I told a story about the girl on the train. And when I told it in our small group, there's lots of language. But when I was asked to, as the ambassador of 80 people, to make that the final presentation, which for some reason I kind of already knew I was going to end up being, not one curse word. So live TV, no curse word. I used to do the Young Turks once a week. They will literally send you a guide saying, if you curse, not only will it be cut, but you will be disinvited from anything in the future. The Young Turks is extremely strict about that. And obviously live TV, if you say fuck, as much as Chris and I are close, Chris Cuomo's not going to invite me back if I say fuck every other word. But there needs to be spaces where we can just talk like normal people. And this kind of brings me back to I took this advanced political reporting class at with the night chair at Newhouse my senior year. And she asked us to go out and talk to people, real people. And I think my idea of real people was different from everybody else in my class, which was only 8 people. But I went out and I just talked to workers. And I asked them, and this was the New York State Fair, I was like, what's it like working here? I was like, I noticed that these people were silent and they were shuffling between the different booths. And it kind of seemed like they had a catch-all job. And I asked them to speak to me. And when I recorded their interviews, there was a lot of language. And my professor was like, you need to go back and redo all these interviews. It's too much language for us to use it. So I was like, have you ever considered for a second that that's the way people talk in a different socioeconomic class? And that by requiring that someone meet your loquacious standards, you are excluding an entire class of people who have learned to speak this way and frankness to each other. And that my camaraderie with these people made them comfortable enough for them to open up and talk to me like I'm one of them. And I thought that was a very good argument. And she was close to going with the word fuck. And I was like, okay. I was like, fair enough. But what was interesting is that my coverage of the New York State Fair, because I was a double major in earth science and journalism, was the first thing I ever had that picked up national news. Because it turns out, and this was in like 2010, 11-ish, that people were being trafficked for the New York State Fair. That they were being shipped in busloads. They were being kept basically in warehouses and empty, like trucking, whatever they're called, containers, and being forced to work for like $2 an hour. And they had no idea who they were working for, but they were just supposed to sell shit and make sure everything was stocked. One of the employees actually watched in front of me get in trouble for talking to me. And it ended up making national news. It became a state investigation and people went to jail. And I remember 10 years later or so, in a night chair with a K at a university is considered the most esteemed position. There's only 5 in the whole country. There's the night chair in political reporting, which is at Syracuse. The night chair in environmental reporting, which I think is at Northwestern or something. But there's only 5 in the whole country. And I challenged this woman at that time. I remember like 5 or 6 years ago, afterwards, when I found out people were convicted for this, I sent it back and was like, do you still wish that I had went out and found people who didn't curse? And she said, she wrote back to me, it was like, do you want to come cover the prosecutions? And I was like, nah, I'm in Louisiana. I'm doing climate shit now, but thanks.
Yeah. No kidding. Yeah. Yeah. That's, probably one of the biggest compliments. And I don't think he thought he was paying me a compliment, but I took it as a compliment. When I was in the Navy, I had a captain say to me one time, he said, I can't say that I approve of your approach to things, but I can't argue with the results.
There you go.
And, I took that as keep getting the results. Now, yeah. I don't think that's something
something about the way that you're doing this is working better than it does for other people.
Right.
And although it may ruffle feathers and make people uncomfortable.
Exactly. And that had a big, that one statement has played a role in my life since that time, because it reinforced an idea that I already had in my head, but I'd never had anybody that I respected like that ever feed it back to me.
Oh, yeah.
And I came away from that going, I am different. I do things different than most people. But here's a guy who's all about the results, and I'm making him happy there.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, I have a very, very close friend who once told me the reason like people like me with ADHD cannot rest when something seems off is because our brains work in such a way that we understand right and wrong in kind of these universal terms. Like if this happens to X or Y or Z, it's wrong. It doesn't matter. And that's kind of like the whole, raid on the students thing. It doesn't matter what the speech is or who said it. That is wrong. And we cannot stop until that thing is fixed. Like we're obsessive almost about it.
Yes.
And it becomes kind of compulsory to be like, and it's kind of associated loosely with autism as well. To be like, nope, not right. I cannot be quiet about it. I cannot do it the way you're asking me to do it. Because that's not the most effective means, and it will not generate the results that are necessary.
That describes me to a T.
Yeah. We see something that is out of place in the context of society, even if that thing is being universally condemned. We must rectify that because it doesn't fit. And people with ADHD, ADD, and possibly autism cannot stop until something fits.
Right. And I think it's important to add to that. Like when I make a post that I know is probably not going to be aligned and therefore not perceived as, okay, that lines up with the core Democratic values, or if I call out somebody in the Democratic Party,
oh no, they don't like that.
I know that as I'm writing it, I already know it's never a surprise that, oh, people don't like this. I know that a lot of people, or at least some people, aren't going to like it, but I can't help myself. I have to write it.
Somebody needs
Yes.
to. And if everybody else is going to shut up about it, then I'm going to be able to say it. I mean, I felt like that, like with the whole COVID-19 tracking schools thing, as I thought for sure states or the federal government will take up this project. It's very important to know how COVID is spreading in schools. And then just watch as all these states plan to reopen. Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida were the first. And nobody had a plan. And I was like, fuck it, I'll do it. Yep. That was literally the origin of the whole project with Google, was that looking around, waiting, expecting some source of authority to take up this problem, seeing that vacuum and being like, okay, somebody has to do this. This is important. Like, we're talking about kids. We have no idea how COVID is going to affect kids. We certainly know it's not effective, as like a lot of people would have you believe. And now we, of course, know that it has long-term cardiac and all types of vascular problems and processing problems. So somebody must do this. And I was the first one to raise my hand. And then Google was like, she's famous. Let's do her. And that's how that whole project that took up like 9 months of my life started, was seeing that no one was speaking and deciding that that was not okay. And I know that you and I probably don't agree on Gaza. That's how I felt about Gaza. I was like, am I the only fucking white person who is willing to put their reputation, their social media prowess, their all of this on the line for this? Because frankly, if my reputation is one that shies away from controversial issues, then I've failed. If it's one that people feel like would be afraid to take an unpopular stance, I've failed. And if it's one that people think would say that it's okay, like what's happening there, then I failed. Because the only reason I ever came forward in the first place was because my privacy had already been sacrificed by not a choice of my own. That was a decision made for me. And at that point, I figured, you know what? I'm one person. And if all of our models are right, 40,000 people are going to die this summer if we continue on this path. And I don't matter as much as 40,000 people. And it ended up being more than double that. And while I have not yet quantified how much of a difference I made, I'd like to think that I stopped some people from participating in that shit show. And if I stopped one person from coming to Florida, just one life, then everything I did was worth it. And if I can convince 10 people that what's happening in Gaza is wrong, and they write their senators, that doesn't feel like a waste to me. It doesn't feel like I've wasted 20,000 followers or whatever I've lost for it. It's like, I cannot help but feel like if I was born there, if I didn't have the privilege of being born here and being born the way that I am, if I was brown with brown eyes and brown skin, and I spoke Arabic, who would I be? Who would my children be? And seeing how clearly that image is painted the second that I even think it, and not saying something, what am I really protecting? I'm protecting my comfort, my fame, my following.
Yeah.
But what is that really worth if it's not people who are dedicated to the same ideals that I am?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think what's interesting about this, because you mentioned, you said, I don't think you and I are probably aligned on Gaza, but one reason that's not like a dividing line between you and I is because I get your passion on this.
You're not like, you're anti-Semitic for thinking that type of thing.
Right.
My God, I got to tell you, my husband is like the most anti-Israel person in the world. He found out a few months ago from Ancestry DNA. I should not. You know exactly where I'm
going.
I
do. Yeah, I do.
That he is Jewish. He's Ashkenazi Jewish from Russia. So for 1,000 years back, he's got Jewish DNA from Russia, which means that both of my children, despite how white and, fair skinned they are part Jewish. And he is too. It didn't change a single thing in his mind. But, I thought, it changes things for me because I mean, nobody's going to suspect me of being Jewish. But at the same time, nobody would have suspected him either. Apparently,
Right.
10% of people in Ancestry DNA's entire database are Jewish. And they're European Jewish. And if they really wanted to go full-on Nazi psycho, when, back in the 1930s and 40s, they instituted like these bizarre face measurement ratios, which were not at all founded in science, but
Right.
But anyway, they went all full on psycho about it. My kids could be subject to that. Like that's to the people that Trump surrounds himself with. Yeah. And I was like, and it didn't change my mind about Israel or Gaza at all, but it definitely changed my mind about anti-Semitism. Right. And it's been interesting to me finding out that my kids are, and I say Jewish, the same way that George Santos said it. Because we never knew about this until recently. And it doesn't diminish how European they are. But at the same time, it's like, they could be a target. Like if Ancestry DNA like surrendered all of its information to the government, I would be fine. I'm like 100% Scandinavian, like Viking princess back to benevolent, the Conqueror, William the Conqueror type. I'm more closely related to William the Conqueror than the current royal family is. And I would be cool. But my kids would be in danger. Yeah. And that has definitely reshaped my view of anti-Semitism, but has not in any way changed my view of Israel. And I think that that's not a distinguishment that a lot of Americans are willing to make. And that's a problem. I lost my best friend in the whole world over this issue. I mean, my absolute best friend before I was famous, going back decades. Somebody I love to this day so much. Because when the story came out about the beheaded babies thing, which was false, I traced it back to where it came from and proved that it was false. And it wasn't false in a malicious kind of way at first. It was like a reporter asked a soldier who spoke to another reporter who spoke to somebody in a community who claimed they had heard from somebody else. It basically took on its life of its own. And to the point that President Biden said it in a public address to the American people. He said he saw photos of beheaded babies. Now, within hours after saying that, he walked it back, or his team walked it back, rather. It's like he heard that photos exist of 40 beheaded babies. And that's where it all started to fall apart. I lost my best friend in this whole world over that, over publishing that was fake, that was not true. Now everybody knows it wasn't true. Like Mehdi Hassan and Zito and Al Jazeera, all these people have found the source, the same source I found, and been like, that wasn't true. That didn't happen. It was just a hearsay thing that kind of got out of control. And I'm not sure I'll ever get that friend back. When my husband found out that he was part Jewish, because I tweeted about it or something, he came back and he was like, has your view changed any in Israel? I told him, I was like, are you kidding me? I was like, whether or not my husband is 10% Jewish doesn't change that this was not true. It does not change for me how important it was to say this is not true, because I saw it being weaponized to criticize an entire group of people as animals, to make them less human so that killing them would seem okay. And that has resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of children. And he told me he would never speak to me again after that. It's like, I can't believe your children are Jewish and you can't be quiet about this.
I think that's one of the challenges people have with people like you and I. They don't know where the fuck what category to put us in, right? We
We
don't
don't
make
fit in
it
a box.
simple. Right. And so
Well, we do, but at the same time, we just don't fit in their boxes.
exactly.
Something is either right or it's wrong. And it doesn't matter where the political fallout comes from that, or the religious play out, or even the ethnic play out. It's either right or it's wrong. And that to us is like a fine line. It's like, you cannot kill children. Like, why are we having this debate? Children are innocent. Killing them is wrong. But then we come into a society where the people that we have associated with or sympathized with, or even been activists alongside of for a decade or longer, are saying that there are some circumstances in which it's acceptable.
Yeah.
But we had we felt like this unspoken language, like we agreed killing kids is wrong. It doesn't matter who does it or why or by whom or for what purpose. It's wrong. I thought we agreed on that, and they don't. So we never changed boxes.
Right.
They left us.
Right.
They found exceptions, and
Yeah.
we were like,
I
no,
think
rape is wrong. Rape is wrong no matter who it happens to. Rape is wrong in all contexts. Rape is wrong whether there's alcohol involved or short skirts. Does not matter. And they're like, well, I mean a short skirt. And we're like, man, like, why did you move to this box?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what it feels like. It's like,
it does.
no, killing kids is wrong.
There are Democrats who loved the idea that as a Republican, I would question and call out somebody within my own party, right? And so when I came to the Democratic, right,
yeah.
and you know, it's like, hey, wait a minute, right? 6 years ago when I did this, you were all like, oh, we welcome you, welcome to our party. And then when
you're not allowed to agree there.
Right. When there are situations where I deem it appropriate to start questioning President Biden or Merrick Garland or whoever it may be, and then all of a sudden, no, we don't do that.
Shut up.
And it's
You're
like,
look, my thought.
Wherever I find myself in terms of a party, if there's questionable shit in my mind, then I'm going to ask questions.
Which you're not supposed to.
Yeah, right.
Because they have this idea that creates division within our party.
Sure.
But that's partly because they don't want to accept the reality that our party has always been divided. It's been a hodgepodge of different cultures, different ideas, the people who have been pushed out all coming together. So, like, if you know anything about the Seminole tribe, this is, I'm for a state for my PhD, so I got to be a little biased here.
I think was Burt Reynolds, was he, or was that a myth?
I have no idea.
Okay. All right. For some reason.
I got really into the lore for my undergrad, but when you get your master's or PhD, it's not as much. Yeah. But it's like the renegade tribe. And for anybody who's listening who doesn't know about them, they were not an actual ethnic group. They were basically all the people who had been pushed out of their own tribes for questioning things or doing things different or seeing a different path forward, who came together and formed a new tribe. They were Choctaw, Chickasaw, they were Biloxi, they were Tunica, all of the different tribes that came together, and it was like, we are the renegades. That is what they call themselves, and that's what Florida State to this day calls themselves, is the renegades.
So that was the Rebecca and Jack tribe, basically.
Yeah, many people have said, we have a different way of doing things, but we all kind of want to accomplish the same thing in the end.
Yeah.
And there was no place for us to do that where we were. So we're creating that place now. And I really connected with the whole Seminole mythology and that context, because, it was about being the odd man out and finding a team of odd men out to accomplish the same goal. You don't have to agree about everything. That's the thing that I think is our party weakness, is right now they really want us to agree about everything. I was like, first of all, until you recognize the G word in Gaza, we're never going to agree on everything. And that's what lost you at the election. And instead of blaming people who saw that, you should blame party officials who pressured Harris into not acknowledging that when she very clearly early on wanted to. That would have distinguished her from Biden in leaps and bounds. But, it's like, we didn't agree on the terms, logistics, but what we really want is to take care of each other.
Yeah.
We want people to be taken care of. And all of our efforts are to move that forward. And as long as you're on that team, you're welcome here. But if you want to join the pitchfork press club into finding this guy who killed the CEO, you're not really one of us. You don't get it.
Right.
Which is interesting to me to see this play out, because the first person who posted condemnation about this was a Democrat. It was Amy Klobuchar. And I remember looking at that and being like, we weren't tone deaf before? Read the fucking room. These people have killed tens of thousands of people every year by denying healthcare claims to children.
Yeah.
And if you don't think killing children with the pen is worse, like tens of thousands, than shooting the guy who did it, the corrupt motherfucker who did it in the street, maybe we're not on the same team.
Yeah, we're not listening.
Yeah. And I was like, even if you don't condone it, okay, murder's bad, blah, blah, blah. I was like, but would you size everybody if they were cheering on the street because Putin died? You're going to go out and say, oh, we shouldn't celebrate the death of blah, blah, blah. I was like, because I remember when Scalia died, the Democrats were happy. And we were like, ding dong, the motherfucking witch is dead, because he had pervasive negative legislature, a deciding person in people's personal civil rights and individual freedoms and liberty. We all celebrated that motherfucker being dead. And I'm not ashamed to say that, because he was a bad person. When Hitler died, people were literally kissing in the fucking street in front of the New York Square, wherever they have all the, any New York centric person can understand what I'm talking about there. But what's called one of the most iconic American photos ever taken in history is two people kissing, two strangers, which is kind of gropey and rapey, but okay, aside from that, there's two strangers kissing at finding out that Hitler's dead.
One of them a sailor, by the way.
One of them was somebody sent out to help kill him. Yeah. Because what are you doing by sending a military out to defeat a foreign enemy if not to kill that person?
Right.
And we accomplished our goal and Hitler was dead. Whole country erupted in cheers. Yeah. Now, if they do that for Putin, I expect that the condemnation will be very low, because it'll be like, he's an enemy,
Sure.
But the problem is with the political elite and the media class is that they don't see CEOs of health companies as the enemy, but we do.
Yeah.
Because we're the people who actually have to deal with them in life or death situations and paying your rent, paying your grocery bill situations. And it's that disconnect. And I mean, I went to journalism school at Syracuse, which is Northwestern, the best journalism school. I know the type of kids that went to that school, and they are not kids that had struggle. Maybe 1 out of 10 had ever wanted for anything in their life. And those are the people who are writing stories right now, because I'm in my 30s. So by now, most of those people are writing the majority of things that you read. None of those kids know what it's like to be hungry, to sleep on a park bench, to watch everything you've ever known be washed away overnight. They don't know that. And so they're looking at the CEO murder as like, this is a violation of our terms of capitalism. And the rest of us are looking at us like, seems like it caught up with him. Right. And they don't understand that. They see it as barbaric. We see it as he kills 60,000 people a year, nets $35 million. And you don't see anything wrong with that.